Louder.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. On behalf of Corporate Pakistan Group and Nutshell Group, I'm very grateful to all of you for your valued presence here at Thought Leaders Dialogue. We'll start our today's proceedings with the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
Please rise for the national anthem of Pakistan. Thank you, everyone. Today's topic for Thought Leaders Dialogue is Pakistan, the next great infrastructure connector. Corporate Pakistan Group, we started 7 years back, and this is Pakistan's national intelligence here. We are hosting several national dialogues. We serve the community in the field of health and education. We are very active, especially in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and Dubai. Earlier, we hosted dozens of several important national issues, dialogues, conferences. And today, we decided to host this dialogue on this important topic. The background of this topic is, first of all, the importance of this Central Asia region, the importance of regional connectivity. And 2 months back, my friend, Ambassador Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, wrote an article on this topic in Atlantic Council. The copy of the article is available on your tables. And we decided to host this dialogue and engage the right practitioners from various backgrounds. So we have with us Senator Dr. Musaddiq Malik. He is Minister of State for Petroleum Division. My friend, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, is a former National Security Advisor. Ambassador Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, he served as Pakistan's ambassador in USA. Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, the chairperson of Pakistan Stock Exchange, SSGC Karandaz, and she also served as former Federal Minister for Finance and also the Governor of State Bank of Pakistan. We also engaged the President of Overseas Investor Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who is also the President of Angro Corporation, Ghayas Khan. And for digital connectivity, we engaged Amir Ibrahim, the CEO of Jazz, a Vion Group company, and he's also the chairman of Mobile Inc. Microfinance Bank. We have with us Air Chief Marshal Suhail Aman, who has served as Pakistan's Air Chief from 2015 to 2018. And we engaged the best moderator in Pakistan, our very dear friend, the founder of Tabat Lab, Musharraf Zaidi, for this discussion. I'm also grateful to my friends of JS Bank team, especially Imran Alim Sheikh, for arranging this article and supporting us to host this conference. I'm handing over the further proceedings to our today's moderator, Musharraf Zaidi. Over to you, Musharraf.
Rahim, thank you for this opportunity, Asfar and Nutshell Group, and welcome to everyone to a discussion that I hope will be illuminating and a little bit of fun as well. इसमें मैं उर्दू और इंग्लिश में मिक्स करता रहूँगा. मुझे लगता है कि उर्दू में थोड़ा इनफॉर्मली ज़्यादा बात हो सकती है और ज़रा खुल के बात ज़्यादा हो जाती है. अभी थोड़ी देर पहले एक व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप में हमारे एक दोस्त ने उन्होंने ज़ाहिरी बात है ये देखा, क्योंकि जब असफर एक इवेंट करते हैं तो सबको पता चल जाता है कि इवेंट हो रहा है. उन्होंने मुझे छेड़ने के लिए कहा, बिल्कुल ऊँट पटांग आउट ऑफ द ब्लू उन्होंने कहा कि ये कनेक्टिविटी शनेक्टिविटी ये क्या बात हो रही है, 30 साल से हम ये सुन रहे हैं और उस पर कुछ नहीं हो रहा. और फिर उन्होंने उसके सबूत के तौर पे जो ट्रेड स्टेटिस्टिक्स हैं पाकिस्तान के अपने इमीडिएट नेबर्स के साथ उनका जायज़ा जो है पेश किया. तो विद दैट sort of not such a flowery and glowing introduction, in a couple of moments I will ask my dear friend Ambassador Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, who's written a fantastic summation. I don't think there's a better summary. It's not fair to say there's not a better one, because Rabia Akhtar also wrote a fantastic summary. I would say कि जो राबिया ने कनेक्टिविटी पे एक पीस लिखा था आज से तकरीबन 4 साल पहले, उसको लें और बहुत से बीच में और pieces आए. Moeed has done an incredible amount of work on it. You'll hear some of the thoughts that Musaddiq and others here have. Honorable Minister Musaddiq Malik, I should refer to people properly. So I think there's a lot of ideas and a lot of thinking and insight that has gone to the question. But in the presentation that we'll get from Ambassador Siddiqui, I would love if he can focus on not the opportunity, which I think everyone in this room is aware that Pakistan does have a phenomenal opportunity to be a regional power, but on the constraints to that opportunity, that given that we've been seeing some maps and we've been hearing this conversation for the better part of 3 decades, what are the things that have prevented us from getting there? And I pose this question with the purpose of ensuring that everybody reads the paper on their own time and actually are able to benefit from a more interactive engagement this evening, because इस तरह से मौका जो है वो कम मिलता है इतने ज़बरदस्त लोगों के साथ. I'm not talking just about the folks on stage, but this is a very, very important audience, and so I think it's important to engage with the real issues. So with that, and with an apology, because I think some of the speakers here may have been given the wrong impression that they'll have 8 to 10 minutes to speak. I'll be interrupting my honorable friends at the 4.5-minute mark, inshallah, and I'll be timing it with this because I'm really interested in going to the bigger crowd. There's some very, very highly qualified global and national level leaders in the audience, and so it's important to get them involved as well. With that, Siddiqui Saab, tell us, you wrote this fantastic paper. Maybe tell us very little about the paper because we want everyone to read it on their own time. क्या मसला है ये क्यों आगे जो है ये ट्रेन जो हम चू करवाना चाह रहे हैं क्यों नहीं चल रही?
Thank you, Asfar, and thank you, Musharraf. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Shall I not cover the paper at all? Which is fine, but is it...
Maybe a very quick, like 2 to 3 sentence sort of summary in terms of what the intent was and what the reception has been, and then just dive into kind of breaking it down a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you.
If I can do this quickly, I'd just like you to imagine in your minds a map of South and Central Asia. And across that map, imagine free-flowing hydrogen, electrons, and photons. In other words, natural gas, electricity, and fiber optic communications. I'd also imagine the free flow of goods, both raw materials and finished goods, in all directions across that map. And imagine that just keep flowing, and Pakistan sitting right in the middle of it. I think that's the opportunity. And I think that, to answer your question, Musharraf, even though we've been speaking about it for a long period of time, it is only now that the circumstances exist for Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia to bind their economies with these natural gas pipelines, electricity cables, fiber optic cables, roads, and rail. And it exists now because of peace in Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan is not, I have to say, the only pathway to accessing Central Asia. In fact, we can do it through China as well, just going north into Xinjiang a little bit and then turning into Kyrgyzstan. There's some development that has to happen, but there are other pathways. But of course, the fact that there was conflict in Afghanistan and it was the most relevant pathway for us to enter Central Asia, that prevented us for a very, very long time. So that's the first point I would make with regard to the hurdle. The second is that desire has to be across all sides. And while we've been speaking about it for a long period of time, today many other countries are speaking about it. Uzbekistan, for example, which has taken quite a principled view in global affairs when confronted with Pakistan and its place in the region, when confronted with China and its place in the region, Uzbekistan has not only exhibited great senses of neutrality in how they position themselves, but also they have now expressed a great interest in building this rail line and boosting trade. Turkmenistan, of course, was working on a gas pipeline with us. Gas pipelines, by their very nature, are very long-term projects. They take decades, but a lot of progress has been made, and my understanding is that for at least a small part of it, the financing is available so far. So their nature is long, but now it's happening. In Afghanistan, in terms of fiber optic communications, I think many of you will know that that Central Asia, in particular many double landlocked countries in Central Asia, really have about 50% internet penetration. And that number will grow to be universal coverage. As it grows, the demand for internet access externally will also grow. Double anyway because of population, but double or triple again because of the usage of the internet. Well, today, the fiber optic lines exiting Central Asia really terminate through 3 countries: Russia, China, and Iran. Pakistan has 6 submarine fiber optic cables already and 2 in construction, plus a huge domestic long-haul fiber optic network. It is only natural that we provide not only a 4th pathway for the exit and entry of the internet, but also one that is incredibly competitively priced. So I think today, because there's some fiber optic development in Afghanistan already, linking these loops has become quite easy. So I think circumstances have changed dramatically in the last few years, and that's why it's something that we need to pick up now.
You've done a fantastic job not only of summarizing what you've done, but also of answering the question. But I also don't want to rob you of the opportunity to say a little bit more about how the paper was received. I think it was interesting that you chose to publish it with the Atlantic Council. And I think that this dynamic of Pakistan making its case, not just at home, but abroad, is super important. And of course, you've done that with great skill in your past sort of assignments. Tell us a little bit about how the reception has been and what you might imagine this group of leaders can do to further the message and make sure that this becomes part of the norms of how we talk about our country and how we engage with the region.
Yeah, Musharraf, I'm glad you asked the why question, why was this done, and also how it was received. So, the why question, I think to answer the why question, one has to think about what is the paper really speaking about deep down inside. And what it's really speaking about is Pakistan's place in the world. I think it solves a very important regional integration, and the paper speaking about it address a very important challenge for Pakistan. And that challenge is one of relevance. Once we were relevant because of Afghanistan, another time we were relevant because we are the second largest country in South Asia. But I think we have a real challenge of relevance in foreign affairs in the world. And what this paper really addresses is that our relevance as a nation is one that is the facilitator, to some degree the architect, and to a large degree in the future the gateway to the whole region. And I think that is the future of our relevance. Now, to answer the question about how it was received, I think the initial reception was extremely positive. This was launched at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi. Unfortunately, I had COVID at the same time, so I couldn't go myself, but the reception was very positive. But I think there were two challenges. One is, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the second is that Atlantic Council, the history of it is it's NATO's think tank. So I think that was a much bigger subject. But having said that, I think the reception's been extremely positive and feedback's been quite strong.
Excellent. I think there might be an argument to say that the Russia invasion of Ukraine actually opens up the conversation and makes it even more urgent. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. Thank you for writing such an excellent contribution to the policy discourse in our country and for our country, Ali Siddiqui. I'm going to ask, and I'm sort of pulling out my phone. You did really well on time, by the way, so congratulations on that. Ghias, you've, of course, you've been part of, I think, one of the greatest, stories of startups and ingenuity in your past role, and I think what you're doing now really is almost the ideal scenario for somebody with your skill set and your experience. One of the dreams that a lot of fanciful Pakistanis like me, a lot of romantics have, is to see Pakistani brands around the world. And maybe the best place to start is within our region, and I know that Engro is looking at that. I know you're not here in that capacity, but both in terms of Pakistan's footprint outside Pakistan and the number of firms and funds and asset managers and international actors in the financial and economic sector that engage with Pakistan. When they hear this conversation, do they get as excited as we are, or are they likely to be more cynical? And what is driving one or the other factor? Ghias?
So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and Assalamu alaikum everyone. Musharraf, thank you very much for that kind introduction. We go way back. At the time when I was in IBA, Musharraf was at LUMS, and I think he's done justice to the years that I've known him with that fine introduction. So thank you. I think it's clearly established, Musharraf, and I'm just going to take a few seconds, that regional trade plays an incredible role in the growth of economies of countries, right? So we've seen that with NAFTA, we've seen that with the European Union. But when we look at Pakistan, and I'm not quoting anything from the WhatsApp messages that you referred to earlier, but 91.2% of our border is with India, Afghanistan, and Iran, and our total trade with them is less than $2 billion. And that's a real moment for us to pause and think about perhaps our national security paradigm and economics now, or economy, the importance of economy being such an incredibly important pillar of that national security paradigm, and regional trade being such an important driver of economy, makes this a very complex conversation. And the reason why we perhaps, and I think Dr. Moeed Yusuf will do more justice to that subject, but the reason why we are perhaps focusing more on Central Asia is essentially for two reasons. Number one, there is obviously commonality of culture, of religion, but more importantly, there is a complementary relationship in that potential trade. So for example, when you talk about industrialization and to your point on how do companies or partners or our OICCI members look at Pakistan, the reason why they don't consider Pakistan to be an export destination is because of the severe limitations of regional trade. So one of the criticisms that we get as OICCI is that how we have very large businesses serving the Pakistan market. Why aren't OICCI companies looking at export? Well, the answer is right in front of you, the limitations of our regional trade. But the opportunity here is very clear. If you look at, let's say, the Central Asian countries, if you look at some of their natural deposits, whether it's, let's say, in phosphates, right? So Pakistan consumes about 2.1 million tons of DAP. From a food security argument, it'll make a lot of sense for us to partner with countries like Kazakhstan and manufacture products over there for onwards consumption locally. There is Uzbekistan, which is producing organic cotton. There is cheap energy available over there. There is a whole case of us doing spinning in Uzbekistan with organic cotton and with using cheap energy to benefit the garment export sector of Pakistan. So, I mean, these are just some examples of how we can benefit from a relationship with Central Asian countries, primarily because there is a complementary trade relationship. We have what they don't have, they have what, you know, I mean, we've got the skills, we've got the port, and they've got natural resources which they want to monetize. And we've got a big market which we can jointly address. So I think the answer to your question that funds and companies, what do they look at when they're considering Pakistan as a trading hub? I think the deeper question is that are we adequately addressing the importance of regional trade? And let's not leave out the 91.2% of our border. And we have to think, overall as to if economy is the real elephant in the room, then there is no economic growth without having effective regional trade. This has happened all around the globe, nothing new, and we have to get used to it.
I was really impressed with the degree of depth that clearly you've either examined or had someone brief you on the kind of complementarities with countries like Uzbekistan. Just on that point, I think for the benefit of the audience, now I don't think it's just somebody briefing you. I think that you in particular have actually examined these questions in great depth. How many other large firm CEOs and corporate leaders in the country do you think about the region beyond the immediate borders? Is this something that's unique to you? I mean, I know that you do it, but are there others that are also thinking like this, that are exploring the complementarities in different verticals with the different stands? Or is it still a very small group of people?
Look, I'm sure there are people are doing that, and I shouldn't be commenting on the strategies of different groups. I think it really comes down to what each organization's priorities are. For example, Engro wants to do businesses where we can set up global scale facilities, right? So we don't want to be dependent on government handouts or unnecessary duty protections, and hence that becomes a function of the size or the scale of the market that we want to address, or the advantages that one can get when it comes to feedstock or what have you. So when you're looking at putting up businesses which are globally competitive, feedstock advantages, scale of the plants, which is a function of the market size, then you're forced in many ways to think regionally as opposed to just Pakistan.
Excellent. I mean, I wanted to make this point, I think, because at least right on the stage here, we have at least two the fact that we're doing this thanks to the support of the JS Group, the fact that you're here on behalf of, not on behalf of, but certainly you represent Engro, regardless of what capacity you're here in. I think that reflects that there are Pakistani firms that are thinking about global and regional ambition, and they're not stuck in the kind of rent-seeking cycle of just dominating the local economy. And I think we need to encourage that and actually celebrate that, because for too long we have a culture, a public discourse in which the private sector and profit-making are considered to be bad guys and a bad thing. So if you don't mind, I would like to actually applaud all the firms, not just the two I've mentioned, but there's many in the room. I would like all of us to actually applaud the ambition of Pakistanis wanting to put Pakistani businesses and Pakistani money-making on the map, because if we don't have that ambition nationally, we're never going to actually actualize this. So a round of applause for all the people that want to create huge global businesses and compete with the Wipros and the Tatas of the world. And it's not just the Wipros and Tatas. There's no reason why we shouldn't compete with the GEs and the Apples too. I'm going to ask, on that note, I'm going to ask Dr. Shamshad Akhtar to join us. She is not joining us in person, but she is here virtually. And I can see her as well. Madam, can you hear what I'm saying? That smile tells me yes.
Can you speak a bit slow so I can hear you properly?
When you say slow, आप चाह रही हैं मैं आहिस्ता बोलूं या आप चाह रही हैं कि मैं आहिस्ता बोलूं?
The connection isn't one of the best ones. So please go ahead and repeat your question.
I will frame my question like this, Dr. Saiba. You've had the benefit of working, when you were at the UN, you were looking at the region. And in fact, that is one of the regions I think that Pakistan understands the least and can learn from the most. And that, of course, I'm referring to is the ASEAN region, where you were leading the United Nations program for several years. In addition to all the other amazing things that you've done, maybe talk to us a little bit about when you were back here, whether it was at the State Bank or when you were caretaker finance minister. When you're back here and you're looking back on your reflections and your experiences in the ASEAN region, what are the big gaps in terms of how Pakistan sees itself that you could clearly identify and that you wish we could do a magic wand on? Let's at least identify some of those key areas where the ASEAN countries have figured it out and where maybe Pakistan is lacking.
Okay, I don't think I got the whole question, but let me just try to pick up some of the threads that you mentioned. First of all, let me thank CPG and Nutshell for hosting this. And I must say that I'm one of those who had read Ali Jahangir's piece, not only this version, but the previous one. So I want to compliment him for providing a comprehensive overview of the projects that he has listed out there. As a person, not at the central bank, but as somebody who has been in the multilateral development business for almost 40 years, I can tell you that I have had the occasion of working on regional cooperation and integration in a number of ways. First of all, and recollecting some of that experience, I can tell you that all regional cooperation and integration endeavors always take a long time. In context of Pakistan, given the difficult terrain and also very complex geopolitics and of course conflict-prone region that we are sitting on, it's taking us longer than what it would have taken us. Would we be in a much more peaceful hub? And all the regional cooperation and integration projects are not very easy to steer across. So I think, and what I see in Ali's paper is about almost 30 projects and a lot of them are in the gas sector, but also there are linkages, road and railway linkages projects. I think Pakistan, relative to some others, has faced difficulty in navigating through geopolitics to harnessing what is geoeconomic interest in other geographies. It's easy to glue the geoeconomic interest than it is in the Pakistan context for the reasons which have been alluded to a while back. But I think there are two sets that I see we have out here. One is these bigger infrastructure, gas pipelines, which have taken longer in other places also, but then we have CPEC, which took us a long time to cement, and now it's so obvious that CPEC is going to pay us dividends. So I have to say that my own learning is, and this is the last point I will make, is that you really need a proper union and a rules-based for it to really glue properly. And by that, I mean, basically, you can't just say, I'm going to do these two projects and that they will just move on. They will take time. But look at the history of ASEAN, and I have been closely involved in that, and also Greater Mekong region. It took, I don't know how many resources, how many person hours for all of us to work on different angles. You have to make sure that the diplomatic stream is clued in with the technical ministries, and that there are fresh protocols between the jurisdictions that are working together. Now in Mekong, there was a whole sub-region, so we had to prepare a lot of protocols. Now here, no such thing is happening as I can see. CPEC, we had one-to-one. With these projects, these are cross-border projects, but are these protocols happening in terms of, with the support of multilaterals? I know funding is coming from multilaterals, but facilitation also has to come from the multilaterals because that makes it easy. Just one last point, I think in order to have a proper regional economic cooperation and integration, you need the development of national infrastructure. Pakistan lacks the national infrastructure experience, and Pakistan has a lot to do in raising its own funding to be able to connect with the cross-border. I'll stop here. There are, of course, other things one can talk of, but I have to compliment Ali because I read his paper, and frankly, being involved now in gas sector, I think the narrative that he has there is right. Of course, the projects are substantially delayed for the reasons you all know, perhaps, and we have lost a lot of time and money in that process, but it's not easy to get these large projects which run through two complex geographies. Over to you, Musharraf sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saiba. That was really succinct and it was perfectly timed as well. My alarm just went off. I do want to come back to you on lessons we can learn from ASEAN. And of course, I definitely want to come back to Ali because there's a couple of themes that have emerged that I want to ask you about, maybe challenge your paper and some of the assumptions there as well. Now, in terms of the order that we're supposed to go, I have Amir Ibrahim next. But Amir, with your permission, I'm actually going to go to Moeed because I think there's an interesting segue in terms of the conversation that we're having so far. The idea of the multilateral engagement, I think, keeps coming up, right? If you're going to have regional connectivity, you need to have fora where countries can sit together and get things done. Moeed, you've, of course, been intimately engaged with some of the challenges of helping Pakistan talk to other countries and also helping other countries talk to each other on Pakistan's behalf. Of course, the biggest example was helping the United States sit down and talk to Afghans. There are many other examples. You were also, of course, involved in the efforts to help Afghanistan by engaging the 6 immediate neighbors of that country with each other. And you were also then witness to some of the regional challengers that wanted to disrupt and perhaps not be okay with Pakistan taking a leading role. And of course, here I'm not just talking about India, although India finds there is no opportunity that India lets go of as far as disrupting and intervening in Pakistan's growth. And of course, this is a national pastime as well, so we leave that part aside. There are other countries that also want to compete with Pakistan. The SCO is one forum, this Group of Six was another, the ECO is another, SARC is another. There's a long list of multilateral fora that supposedly Carrick, of course, that Ali Jahangir Siddiqui's dealt with in the paper. There's a long list of these multilateral fora, and yet the motion or the progress on these issues doesn't seem to be getting made. Help us understand why all these multilateral fora and yet so little progress on getting along with these countries.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank you, Asfar, and to the group for having me here. So I'm not going to answer your question because I think this is the second question you should ask me. So I'll put a first question.
You've always been your own man, Mohit. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, I say this for a reason. I actually, the more I thought about this panel, and this may surprise some of you because I was probably the most vocal messenger of a pro-connectivity message when I was in government. But the more I thought about it, I think I'm going to end up being the contrarian on this panel. I used to play a sport semi-professionally 25 years ago, and my coach always used to say, don't use the word potential with me. And when you ask him why, he would say, all you're telling me is you've never achieved anything in life. That's sort of the tale of connectivity for South and Central Asia. So you look at Ali's paper, it's actually brilliant, lays out very specifically projects, what to do. Rabia, as you mentioned, we've done a lot of work. At the end of the day, it is all potential. Because the reality is what Iyas has just talked about. 91% of the border and hardly any exchange. I wouldn't say trade, frankly, hardly any exchange. So what's behind it? And let me say two things here. First, at least in my experience before government and in government when we started working on this, I realized that we have this conversation about geostrategy and geoeconomics all the time. And I'm not sure we understand either term. So when we got to drafting the national security policy and started talking about geoeconomics, the first pushback I got was, but aap geostrategy ko khatam kar rahe hain. And so one had to go into this conversation to say they're actually the same thing. It's just about the approach you take to the problem and what you want to prioritize. And when we started looking at that aspect, connectivity became the big thing, and it got buried in the larger conversation, I think, about geostrategy and NSP. But we actually have a framework that we put in the document, I can't remember where we talk about geoeconomics for Pakistan as a combination of development partnerships with the world, connectivity in the region, and a prerequisite which is regional peace. So security is inbuilt into that conversation of connectivity. So the first thing I'd say is we need to think through the approach we take to these problems. Geostrategy is going to be central, but the question to answer is, you have a fence on the Afghan-Iran border. It is needed because of security concerns. Now, what will you do to make sure that we facilitate formal movement of trade, investment, and people in a way that the fence becomes an enabler of connectivity rather than a hindrance? It's just a question of approach at the end of the day. So the first thing I'll tell you is, I think we have struggled on connectivity. I think we will continue to struggle on connectivity unless we can agree with the region on what this term geoeconomics means and how we're going to move forward. The second part of this, where I become very pessimistic, is that in most cases around the world that I've looked at, anytime a country wants to move in the direction of connectivity, it either can be the hegemon of the region and control that pace, which we are not, or the business case should be so clear that everybody would actually move in that direction in sync. In our case, neither is true. And I would actually implore everybody to think through this. At least my experience, and Musaadi Sahib is sitting here, he can talk about now. Every time connectivity came up, there was a debate about the business case. It was never clear that this is going to be as beneficial as we think. So we talk about energy infrastructure. Harun is sitting here. He's sort of the man who did a lot of that. But frankly, in the government, you still have this debate. It's very expensive energy. Is it worth it? Do we now need it given that we are moving to renewables, blah, blah, blah. We talk about India. Yes, people will put figures in front of you, but there'll be equally strong arguments saying, is it worth it? We'll be flooded, etc., etc. My view on this is that the world has enough data out there to show that if the region doesn't integrate, countries don't grow. But that's not how political economy works. You've got vested interests, you've got past dependence, you've got muscle memory. We've got to work through that. Final point I want to make is, please look at the 91% of the border. And now I speak as a security person. You've got Iran. It's not our doing Iran is closed. How do I open up with Iran? Until Iran is sanctioned, where do I go with this? I'll give you a very good example. We were dealing with something in the policy space. Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, rail. I'm sure everybody knows that, it started. A few days later, somebody came to me and said that rail is not happening and the road is also stopped. And I said, what happened? They said, well, the TIR, Turkish trucks are exempt from US sanctions, but Pakistani trucks are not. So NLC and others can't move. And that's the end of it. So it's not in our control. Afghanistan, I can tell you, I have 1 million gray hair than I had before I joined government. 90% of those have come because of dealing with that problem. We dealt with it every single day to the point of how many trucks can they not cross. But the fact of the matter is, you've got a country that's internationally isolated. There's no banking system functional. Central Asia is on board. They want to do it. We concluded a lot of agreements. Actually, the Commerce Secretary is here. They did a lot of work on Central Asia. But without Afghanistan, it's a non-starter. Right? The financing is gone, people are out of there, not in our control. And India, finally, some may say...
Before you jump on India, just because our time is also gone and I want to get a few more comments in. Do you want to continue on India or should we park that? Because I'm going to come back to you also on the multilateral question and I want to move the conversation
I just want to say one sentence, which is that India is as complicated as it gets. But if you were to ask me, the one-liner I would put to you is, given the geopolitical milieu that we are in, unless the economic side can make such a clear business case for this regional integration, you will always have conversations which take it in the opposite direction.
I think it's really useful to have that clear-eyed realism, and perhaps for me, slight pessimism, but it's useful. And I think, again, this is an accumulation of issues that we're going to bring back to Ali when we've got everyone in. Amir, I'll come to you as well, but I'm also conscious that we might lose Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. So again, with your permission, is it okay if we go back? Dr. Akhtar, if you're still with us, I'm conscious that the connection may not work for very much longer, and so since we have you, could you say a little bit more about the political... Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
I just want you to speak a little bit about the political challenge in the Mekong Delta and in ASEAN. These are not countries that are natural allies or that didn't have territorial disputes or that hadn't fought wars. What was the mechanism through which they overcame those political challenges to develop economic integration? And do you see such a pathway forward for this region?
I think cross-border connectivity does wonders to promote peace, but peace is a prerequisite for cross-border connectivity or cross-border collaboration and for people-to-people connectivity, which is also a prerequisite. I can tell you from my interface with ASEAN, which has been deep, that ASEAN has a very elaborate framework, and it has two elements to it. took a long time to develop an understanding amongst its members, and Greater Mekong region is also a subset of ASEAN, as you know. They really worked hard at trying to develop an understanding of how peace can be nurtured. They may not have wars as they were brewing together, but there were lots of tensions within that bloc. But what was good about it, that they have developed an intergovernmental process where they deliberate on peace at the Foreign Office levels and the related security level. And then they have a whole scheme of intergovernmental deliberations which take place on different sectors. So I can tell you that when we started the debate of sustainable development, as you may know, sustainable development inherently is actually got a huge amount of agenda on cross-border. But it's not just infrastructure connectivity. It tries to look at elements such as the trade, which is a missing link within our architecture between, I mean, we have had discussions, but it's been very, in my view, poorly managed and poorly handled despite some evidence. But ASEAN is working hard on 3-4 tracks, like disaster management. There is a huge amount of work that goes on. It's been they invited me to talk about sustainable development, to understand the agenda itself at a very early stage. And the foreign ministers got together and endorsed that agenda and came to a common page. Now, when it came to infrastructure connectivity, we developed for them a master plan for transport. And we, of course, talked to them a lot on the energy connectivity. That did not move that fast. And it still is stuck. I mean, I've been out of that for the last 5 years and I haven't checked. But it was very difficult, despite my dialogue with individual countries and with the ASEAN Secretariat. But when it came to the other agenda, it was easy to navigate, particularly the sustainable development. They love peace. They love to talk about the climate. They love to talk about all the issues that matter in terms of the social cohesion and all that. And I think those are, and this would be my last point, that actually I think what we do is, in our regional cooperation dialogue, we immediately jump into the hardcore stuff, and we are inefficient. And Central Asia is more inefficient than us, because Central Asia was my full region under me during the transition period. I can tell you that even if Uzbekistan has opened up or whatever, it takes a hell lot of time, the bureaucracy, to get this right. So Pakistan has to understand that, yes, of course, it is positioned as cross-border connector. But it's, I personally don't think that we can take that for granted. It has the potential, absolutely, but only if we can build the narrative on geoeconomics more strongly so that it takes precedent over geopolitics, as Mohit just pointed out. Without fixing, of course, geopolitical dynamics, where we are surrounded by troubled, fragile states, which are historically least integrated, particularly on trade side. And also people-to-people connectivity has improved now, but it's not that substantive as far as I can tell. And also, we have to learn from successes of other regional cooperation models. Europe, ASEAN, and other platforms. What lends me confidence today is that, of course, we have some projects which are in the pipeline, as Ali has pointed out. Work is underway on these 30 projects. But if you go threadbare into it, most of them are still in the planning stage or feasibility stage. There are few on which work has started, but if you add up the 2 decades that we have lost and the cost increment that's being built in it, and what eventually will be the cost of it, I'm not sure what the economics is telling us. So we need to change the way we work. And we have to also, another point we need funding for these projects. Multilateral development institutions are providing us funding for basically non-project thing, policy-based loans. We have to divert that policy-based loan to investing in infrastructure. If we were to say, we want from World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and whatever other agencies we are going to deal with, we want a dedicated fund for regional connectivity. I think we would have a very powerful funding source which can be deployed without being disruptive to all of us. And last point is, connectivity doesn't happen without having the cross-border technical details sorted out, whether it's the customs administration or it's got to do with the transport connectivity, which has so many protocols, or for that matter, in case of power. I have been working with the region when I was there about trying to develop a power grid, which could eventually be able to move variable energy, because we wanted them to move on renewable energy. So I think it requires a lot of strategic thinking. And I must confess, although I'm not within the government, I don't get the sense that there is that intellectual or technical ministry's input into the design of some of these things going on. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts.
No, thank you for sharing them. I think the kind of detail and the granularity that Dr. Akhtar talked about is something all of us need to be invested in. Those are the issues that actually make the transition possible from just talking about an issue to actually understanding what it would take. One of the people on the panel, and this goes for pretty much the entire panel, but Ahmed, you actually have also worked for a substantial period of time in the ASEAN region, and of course, your current job is about connecting people. That's what telcos and technology is all about. Many of Pakistan's complaints about itself, about not having the kind of export profile that we should, those can be solved through dramatic improvement in what we export to the world in terms of technology, products, and services. Again, this is one of those things, just like regional connectivity, we've been talking about for, it feels like almost 2 decades, and yet the reality is that, the FBR will come and shut down the country's largest telco head office, that, there's many other things that have happened, including to Telenor, even, people complain about Zong not being touched, but I think even Zong suffers when some of the decisions around spectrum auction and taxation are taken. So in an environment that seems to be hostile to technology and telcos, how are we supposed to be hopeful about digital connectivity? And again, Ali, that's a question I'm going to bring back to you, but Ahmed, sitting in the position that you're in, how do you put on a smiley face and pretend that this is actually doable in the environment that you currently operate in?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for finally getting to me on the 3rd attempt. Telecom sector is kind of used to getting ignored when we talk about infrastructure, which is sad. So I almost gate crashed the event this morning. I called Asfar and I said, listen, you're talking about infrastructure. And how come, okay. So I called Asfar and I said, listen, how come you're talking about infrastructure, but you don't really have anybody from the telecom sector? And that's the legacy mindset, right? We have to change that mindset, because infrastructure is not just roads, hospitals, schools, it's also digital connectivity. And telecom is not just a sector as we have traditionally looked at it, it's a sector of sectors. So this sector will enable education, this sector will enable health, this sector will enable banking, it will enable commerce. And when we only take a very limited view of it, we end up making the wrong decisions, as the government has in the past, and I'm saying it very non-partisan manner. We look at telecom and smartphones as luxury convenience factors. These are essential services that we must afford to every single Pakistani. And as we are seeing what's happening in Balochistan and Sindh and even Punjab in the floods, your reliance on connectivity and communication is at the same level as it would be in a war level. So what we have to change in Pakistan, unfortunately, we're already late to the party, is the mindset around telecommunications and the need for robust digital connectivity, a robust, expansive digital infrastructure. And if we continue to keep on looking at it as a governmental value capture, whether it is through the spectrum fees or right-of-way issues that all of the telecom fiber companies face, then we are basically going to be milking the cow today. And we can't afford to do that anymore. Now, most of us, perhaps even in this room, will have an impression about the telecom sector. It must be extremely profitable because everybody has a phone. There are 190 million SIM connections. Every person has a smartphone, which is actually factually not correct. Only 50% do. But while we have made a lot of progress over the years, in cricketing terms, I would say that our run rate is improving, but it is not at the required run rate level. And some of the comparisons, and I hate to make comparisons with India, unless it's Babar Azam and Virat Kohli. Other than that comparison, I'm kind of hesitant making comparisons with India because I think that train has already left the station. India last week had a 5G auction where they raised $19 billion. In Pakistan, there isn't a 5G case even if the spectrum was offered free. So this is how far we have been left behind. And in most of the comparisons, with the exception of affordability, Pakistan digital readiness or internet readiness is at the last quartile of every single comparison we make. Certainly not a position that I would like to be in, I would like our industry to be in. And while we're talking about regional trade and regional connectivity, eventually the commerce will happen in different ways from how we have looked at it in the last 20 years. And we are underinvesting and we are looking at this particular sector in a very jaundiced way. And we have to urgently fix our way of thinking, our way of looking at it, and recognizing the importance of this particular sector in the future of Pakistan. The thing that you hold in your hand, I keep on saying it's the remote control to your life. You will get educated on it, the smartphone. You will do commerce on it. You will get medical advice on it. You will obviously talk to each other on it as we have in the past. But it is a lot more than just a communication tool. Unless we change that mindset and unless we actually have an ambition as a country that there should be a smartphone in every hand and an internet in every home, we were not going to fulfill any of the connectivity ambitions that perhaps this forum would like to achieve and this country deserves to achieve. So that would be my plea. I still have a smile on my face because every single day we get up, we have to try to convince our colleagues in the government, whether it's this government, previous government, or future government. And it's not that they do not recognize the importance of it. I think we operate in a complex environment where we have imperatives, and some of those imperatives are governmental value capture in the short term. And that is very misleading. The World Bank has shown that whenever there's a 10% increase in broadband penetration, there's a 1.4% increase in the GDP of the country. That's the right lens through which we have to look at it. Pakistan needs digital connectivity. We provide, by the way, I read it somewhere that 130,000 kilometers. I think we have about 70,000 kilometers. Yes, we are connected through 6 cables across the sea, but our infrastructure within the country is woefully weak. And I think that's where we need a different kind of lens to look at this picture.
Thanks so much, Ahmed, and also thanks for being patient and waiting despite me teasing the audience and you with your name. Everybody was really anticipating that presentation, and it was well worth the wait. Thanks. Dr. Musaddiq Malik, this brings us to you. I wouldn't call you the final speaker because we are going to go back to Ali and ask him to explain and dilate upon some of these issues, because I think the paper does address some of them, and I think that we need to think through these things more carefully. But in the position that you're in, one of the conversations that you and I have also had is the potential for what Pakistan can gain in terms of its energy mix. And of course, I've heard you speak about this, but I'd love for you to, again, expand on those opportunities, but also tell us what you think is realistic and what it is that you need from the group here, from the audience here, in terms of thought leadership or public discourse that'll enable you to be able to achieve the connectivity that will lead us to where we want to go in terms of our economic growth. Dr. Musaddiq Malik.
I think the first thing that we need is the participation of a few more ladies. I'm glad you gate crashed, my friend, and now I know why you were interrupted a few times. But I really wish a few thought leader women had also gate crashed the party. And I wish our governor, esteemed ex-governor, had been on the stage. I think it would have looked good. I would just share with you two perspectives real quick. The first is the energy perspective, and the second is the trade and growth perspective. And obviously they're interrelated. It's been said a number of times here that countries don't grow, regions grow. And whether it be NAFTA or GCC or ASEAN or Mercosur, no matter how you cut and slice, you've begun to see all across the world that the regions are growing. And in order for regions to grow, in order for a particular country within a region to grow, the lifeline of growth comes from energy. Or may I say, one of the lifelines for growth comes from energy. And therefore, it is not an accident that you have an 8,700-kilometer long gas pipeline, the West-East pipeline, which takes the Turkmenistan gas through Xinjiang province all the way to Shanghai. It is also not an accident that you have the National Unification Pipeline, which is 5,000 kilometers long in Brazil, or the Trans-Saharan Pipeline that connects Nigeria with Algeria, which is 4,000 kilometers, or the Yamal Pipeline, which takes the Russian gas and through Poland and Belarus takes it all the way to Germany. It's because if we are going to grow, and if we are going to grow as a region, then many things have to be integrated. And one of the more important things that needs to be integrated is the energy infrastructure. It needs to be leveraged. So Pakistan also requires both its energy portfolio to broaden, as well as its trade links to expand. These are two very important things. When you look at Pakistan's energy sector, you find that Pakistan has near about 90% exposure to the GCC. So what is the problem? Most of our energy needs, whether they be the LNG needs or the petroleum product needs or the crude, is all coming from the GCC. Well, there's a risk there, and the risk is the Strait of Hormuz. And that's just a 70-kilometer wide kind of little canal through which our entire energy comes through. And if for some reason, for some kind of God-given, God-created reason or human-created reason, if this 70-kilometer canal or the passage is choked, we're going to be tough out of luck. And therefore, it is mission critical strategically for us to broaden our portfolio of energy. Now, in order for us to broaden our portfolio of energy, we began at some point in time to look around. And we found a very important thing which has already been mentioned. We found out that Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have enormous hydro energy potential. We also found out that Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and most of all Turkmenistan, they have fossil fuels, enormous fossil fuels. Turkmenistan, I believe, is one of the largest gas reserves of the world now. So we said, what is it that they need? And we found out that they don't have any passage for exports. They are land-bound, landlocked, and they cannot export their energy, and they also cannot export their other factor inputs. And what is it that we don't have? We don't have the energy. We have people, we have infrastructure, reasonable infrastructure. I won't say a world-class infrastructure, but reasonable infrastructure which is ready to grow. But starting from, if you look back over the past 20 years, you find out every 6 to 5 years, 5 years, 7 years cycle, we go into darkness. We talk about so much energy, and then we go into darkness. Then we build up energy, then we say so much energy, then we go into darkness. So this cyclicality is costing us a lot. By one World Bank estimate, just a few years ago, we were basically losing about 2.5% of our GDP simply because we did not have energy. We need energy, they have energy. We have ports, we have infrastructure, we can export, they want to export. So it appeared to be a natural kind of, there appeared to be a natural synergy. So we started a bunch of projects a few years ago to diversify our energy risk. We started with CASA 1000. This was the Tajikistan and the Kyrgyzstan hydro energy. And we cut a deal or structured a deal where we could have access to anywhere from 1,000 megawatts to 1,300 megawatts of low-cost energy. And as my friend told me today, when we initially began, Harun told me, it was a 3-cent energy, very inexpensive energy. But when you started to load the security costs onto it, by the end of it, it became a 13-cent energy, which was not worth anyone's while. So 3 cent was okay, 13 cent was not. And what stood in the way was the cost of security. So this energy we can only have through Afghanistan, and the cost of insecurity or instability in Afghanistan was about 10 cents. So there's so much for CASA 1000 or 1300. The second project that we initiated was TAPI. TAPI was Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline. It was a brilliant, fantastic project, very large project. Some people believe that it was simply there to mitigate the IP, the Iran pipeline project that we had initiated. But other people have a broader view and they think, no, in itself, it was a fantastic project. This was a 1,850 kilometer long project, which was worth about, which would require an investment of about $10 billion. But that was not the kicker. The kicker was not that the project required $10 billion. The kicker was that we could have access to most of that energy that was going to flow through the pipes for less than $500 million. And of those $500, the only amount that we had to invest in the way of equity was $200 million. So for $200 million, we could have 1.3 BCDF of gas from TAPI. So what went wrong? What stood in our way was Afghanistan. The same problem that we had with CASA 1000. We had the cost of instability. We had the cost of insecurity. And when you build the cost of instability and insecurity into what otherwise looks like a fantastic program, what do you end up having? Nothing. So what do we have? Nothing. We still have that paper plan, which is not going anywhere. The third project that we had was Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline. And this was another very good project, 780 kilometers of pipeline that would connect Gwadar all the way to Nawab Shah for about $2.2 billion. And we were well on our way. And what happened? What stood in our way? What stood in our way was regional instability again. So we had Iran. Strategically, what we wanted to do was diversify our portfolio. We want to mitigate the risk of the Strait of Hormuz and diversify our energy portfolio. And we found out, exploring everything, that in trying to mitigate that risk, we assumed the risk of Afghanistan's instability, and we assumed the risk of sanctions on Iran. So it didn't work very well. Now I'll basically shift gears. I'm not going to talk about, because I don't think today's topic is about the diversification of energy portfolio, because we have a fantastic renewable energy program, which would use our indigenous resources to diversify our energy. But that's not the topic for today, because you're talking about regional connectivity. I can talk about it if there are any questions, but not for right now. But I would suffice to say that it is such a fantastic program that the government of Qatar has committed an enormous amount of money into that renewables policy, new policy that we're putting together. So hopefully we'd be able to absorb their investment appetite and bring in a lot of foreign investments into the renewable energy, and that would diversify our risk to a certain extent. I would now just take a couple of minutes and talk about growth. Our growth mantra is going to come from the aspirations, our aspirations, as well as the aspirations of our neighbor China. China, for its own political stability, requires a balance, an economic balance between the eastern provinces and the western provinces. Therefore, they're committed to basically growing their western provinces, having growth, I believe, from 3% to 13% or 12% is their target of growth for the western provinces. And the only connectivity, much like Central Asia, or one of the connectivity pathways goes through Pakistan all the way to Gwadar. So that basically, as you guys know, the Belt and Road Initiative, therefore, is mission critical for the western provinces to grow. And Gwadar is the exit to ocean. Other than Gwadar, there's no exit to ocean that they have in the way of growing their western provinces. So our entire initiative, CPEC initiative, as well as the port of Gwadar, become very important. So we have a chance. We can, if we can basically draw the energy from the Central Asian states. We can possibly put a train at Gwadar and use that train, the LNG train, to begin to export LNG and not just become the importers of energy, but start to participate with the Central Asian countries to become an exporter of energy from the Gwadar site. That could be one thing. The second important and interesting thing could be Chinese participation in this gas pipeline and setting up, so to say, a petrochemical city or cluster around Gwadar. And that basically is an area in which Pakistan can also participate, the private sector, the multinational corporations, the Chinese, and the CPEC. The entire belt can participate, and we can build up a petrochem downstream industrial cluster and become exporters of that. Obviously, if we do these two things, many other things would happen. And all of these corridors, the economic corridors and the industrial parks that we've planned around the CPEC, kind of the entire length of the way, they would hopefully come about and energize Pakistan. And for that energizing Pakistan towards economic development, we would have the energy required. We already have the manpower, and we have a reasonable infrastructure that we will unleash towards our growth. In summary, in regional connectivity and regional growth, and Pakistan's position in that regional growth, what is the asset that we have? The asset that we have is our geopolitical situation and our foreign policy. What is the problem that we have? The problem that we have is our situation, location, and our foreign policy. So I would only finish by saying that one of the ways of finding security is through peace. And perhaps this is the time to try it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I'm really glad that you did what you did and the way that you did it in, because that brings us back to Ambassador Ali Jahangir Siddiqui. Ali, with your permission, I just want to lay out what's going to happen for the rest of the evening. One, I'd like you to maybe walk us through a few of the challenges that were posed in the conversation, not so much to what you're proposing, but certainly to the idea of regional connectivity. I think Moeed spoke about it quite cogently, and I think part of what Dr. Malik presented was also maybe a counterfactual, or certainly a resistance that is innate in those projects, particularly Kaza, TAPI or TAP now, and the gas pipeline. Maybe address those, but also talk about how you've conceived in this paper, because I think one of the most interesting things you did was you distinguished between electricity and gas, whereas in most cases, when we talk about this, we bunch it together. So do explain what the logic of how you broke down those four connective tissues was, and also give us a little bit more hope than what Dr. Moeed Yusuf and Dr. Musaddiq Malik are willing to concede this evening.
I'm very hopeful.
Thank you. If I miss answering one of the counterfactuals, just please remind me. I think let's start with what the Honorable Petroleum Minister was saying, which is he came up with a business case that works. So I think the thesis was that just a gas pipeline may not have a business case, but were we to add on one of two or three things, in this case, putting an LNG train so some of the gas can be exported and we make more money doing that than the cost, then that's a sensible idea. Or having China participate in taking some of the gas that way. So the idea is that there are business cases to be made. And this leads to what you said, what you asked about, Musharraf, why was energy separated into two? Because the business cases of electricity and the business cases of natural gas are quite different. In the case of natural gas, our economy is configured for natural gas. We produce enormous quantities of fertilizer from natural gas. That's a feedstock. It's quite hard to change that. It's possible, but it's incredibly expensive. So we need a certain amount of natural gas in the system simply to produce fertilizer. The alternate is we buy a lot of fertilizer and import that, which is more expensive, but we've spent the money on these fertilizer plants. Fertilizer plants happen to last really forever. You do capex maintenance on them and it just lasts forever. So we have that installed. We have to produce fertilizer. We need gas. Our own natural gas is declining. So the question is, are we as the government solving the problem of availability of gas, or are we solving the problem of the price of gas? When we speak about just the business case on the basis of price, I don't think that's accurate. We have to first solve for availability of gas, because without it, we will not have fertilizer and many other things. We have new gas-fired, highly efficient power stations, and they need to be fed with gas. And regardless of gas being expensive, those plants are so efficient that they will still be competitive. So the case for gas is very clear. It's first a case of availability to run our economy, and second, it's a case of financial business case for which, as the Honorable Minister pointed out, there are some add-ons and alternates. The case for electricity is less clear. There is a non-financial benefit to having an interconnected electricity grid, which is for frequency stability, which is if there's a problem on your own grid, you can take help from a grid you're connected to. But in our case, that is a small gain. Because it's a small gain, I think the bulk of the electricity argument is an economic one. And the electricity, it is true, A, it's seasonal, and B, it is not so cheap. Although at the moment our electricity prices are very high, we should work on bringing those down. But nevertheless, having said that, electricity cables are not terribly expensive. So for TAPI, the idea was if there's going to be a secure corridor carrying a gas pipeline, we're going to secure it anyway. Just above it, we may consider an electricity line, and below it, a fiber optic line. So that's the general point on the business cases. We have to develop business cases, but in some cases, it is an essential thing for us because the alternate is incredibly expensive and, of course, as the Minister pointed out, dependent on bottlenecks like the Hormuz. Now, with regard to process, I think that there was a number of comments made around process, saying it can't be done because of this hurdle or that hurdle. Well, we've had a close relationship with China for most of our independent life as a country. But that relationship did not crystallize into much beyond a defense relationship until CPEC was created. And how did that happen? Very slowly at first, then very fast. And that was a function of leadership in politics. It was a function of China's own desire. And ultimately, in less than a decade, we spent close to $30 billion of development money. So I think this is a question of, yes, it's been many decades we've been speaking about it. For a long time, we We've tried. Yes, there are many hurdles, but we have to define a process that actually makes it work. I would not be one to give up. So what is that process? In the case of CPEC, we had joint working groups with China, political buy-in from both sides first, then joint working groups, interministerial coordination on both sides within the joint working groups, and then, of course, there was the availability of money and resources from China. I'm not saying we can follow the same route because we don't have the same dynamics or resources, but let's start with something small. Let's start with some low-hanging fruit that we can deliver to demonstrate to the other countries that despite all of the challenges that were highlighted and others that we have not yet done, we can deliver something. And what would that be? I would pick digital connectivity. My point on our domestic infrastructure in telecoms was it's far superior to Central Asia and Afghanistan. And once it's in the ground, we can upgrade it. So the point is, a fiber optic line is cheap, and it gets buried under the ground. And you have to worry less about it being a problem from a security perspective than a gas pipeline. So let's bury a high-speed fiber optic line, connect to the Afghan system and the loop they have, and reconnect it in the north, and start providing connectivity. Let's give that as a test case. This project will cost in the scores of millions of dollars on either side. And it can be delivered quite fast, and that pipe would be buried. And that would be a great first step to show what can be done without forming the complex infrastructure, the soft infrastructure of project delivery, of a joint working group, of lots of financing, of the soft infrastructure. And I must acknowledge the work of the Commerce Ministry, and Swale Faruqi Saab is here from there. The soft infrastructure, which is already being put in place, but without all of that, we can just connect it. So I would say there's some low-hanging fruit to demonstrate what can be done, and then we work on the bigger projects. I'll make one final point, and I'll hand over to you, and please tell me if I missed something. I feel quite let down by the generation before me. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, in the face of all of these problems, which I will argue are less in the case of regional connectivity today than they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But in the face of all these problems, do we not tackle the problem? And do we let our children be disappointed with us?
Thank you, Ambassador Siddiqui. I think, I was going to make the point, and I think I would like to reiterate it. I think I don't think there's any cynicism. I think what Moeed said and what Dr. Malik said are absolutely right. And I don't see Haroon here anymore, but, he's worked a lot on process. And, it's very clear that the Pakistani state, as it's configured today, is simply incapable of conducting the sophisticated and nuanced and detailed negotiations and engagements that are required for doing this with multiple countries. I think you're right to acknowledge the Commerce Ministry. It takes an entire division and, like all of their life force to focus for a sustained period of time to manage this with one country. And I know Faruqi Saab is working on multiple countries right now in the run-up to the SCO conference, which is going to be another opportunity for us to integrate this into our national thinking. But I do think that just because something hasn't worked for a long time is no reason for us to throw in the towel and say, this is never going to work. I think the fact that the business case isn't compelling, Moeed, is all the more reason for a group like this to really be interested in this conversation, which is my way of asking you to now, A, respond to the multilateral question, but also to maybe explain your realism a little further, because I know that you're not a pessimist.
Thank you. Since you singled me out, and I think the sitting minister, I don't want to leave an impression that Pakistan's moving in some other direction. Look, the point is, I invested more time on connectivity. I think Commerce Ministry sitting here, I see the Foreign Office together than perhaps anybody at that time, looking at this strategically. The point I'm making is that much of the conversation we've had and what Ali is saying, it's a given. I mean, there is no option but to move in this direction. So, throwing in the towel is not even a conversation. I think the starting point of the conversation goes beyond Ali's paper, because there is no debate on that this is what needs to happen, and these are the potential projects, areas where we can go. Let me say 2 or 3 things. Again, you're going to call me a pessimist, but I really want to point out where we were getting stuck. Ali says digital connectivity is the low-hanging fruit. There are people in this audience who will bail me out. It took us months to agree how to get a truck from Central Asia into Pakistan without a hassle. It took us months to get to a point where an Afghan truck would be allowed to go to Karachi and a Pakistani truck would cross over into Central Asia. The point I'm making is, I think the problem is we have tried to do big things without having any foundation to show that this can work. There's a lot of cynicism, there's a lot of people who say, well, this is just not worth it, and that's not where we want to go. So I think if Ali were to write another paper or one of us were to do it, here is what I would say. Let's take 5, 6, 7, 10 doable things in the next 2 to 3 years. Point out the business case, but then draw up an action matrix to say who has to do what to get us there. I think that will then drive this conversation beyond, no, it can't happen. I think in some of the comments we're hearing, it's again the same thing. Geopolitics has to fix itself to go to this. I don't think it's going to work that way. It's too complicated in this region. So you've got to come at it from the business case and then move forward. Just 2 other quick points. One, I think we need 2 conversations and 2 very healthy, constructive conversations. I don't know, Asfar, maybe your group can do this. One is a public sector, private sector conversation. How does the private sector convince the public sector that they have to lead this and the public sector has to facilitate? And with all due respect to everybody, I mean, I was part of that system. We have to get out of this mindset that the private sector needs to be regulated, otherwise they're going to run away with things and something's going to go horribly wrong. We only need to facilitate and the private sector has to find that business case. That's one. So a public sector, private sector conversation has to happen. The second one is a conversation with the people who put up this business case and the economists in the room and the business people in the room and the security. So people like me and people who are arguing, Ali is not that, but a lot of the executives sitting here, there is no conversation. So what happens? You create a plan in your world on how connectivity should happen. Right? So we've heard this project will happen because it has this much gas is going to come through. I will look at it and say, sorry, somebody can blow it up. No, the border's not ready. There's, I have a geopolitical. We need to sit down and figure out where that sweet spot is. Because all of Pakistan's connectivity issues are going to be resolved through a political economy lens. Neither a security nor an economic lens.
Thanks. I think that element was missing in the conversation. It's valuable, and I'm glad you brought it up. Minister Saab ki ijazat se, because I do want to bring you back into the conversation, Dr. Saab. लेकिन ये private sector क्योंकि बात हो रही थी, तो मैं चाह रहा था कि ग़ियास खान फिर से जो है इसमें आपने काफ़ी ये, you heard a lot of the sort of both the case for perhaps connectivity optimism, which might be a new term, and connectivity realism. I think if somebody was to ask me where I'm leaning, I think I'm certainly leaning in the direction that the leadership in this conversation has to come from the private sector, because the public sector is constrained by a number of factors. We've talked about some of them. There's a long list. Ghiyas, do you see that emerging as a reality, or do you think there are not enough world ambition level businesses in our country that just won't happen, that people are too busy? I shouldn't even say rent seeking. I think lots of businesses are too busy trying to survive in their domestic markets, in their local markets. So how do we get a business sector, a private sector, business leaders that are ambitious and hungry enough to be interested in this conversation and then to lead the conversation? Because जो लोग अभी तक lead करते रहे, उनसे ये काम नहीं हुआ है. I think that much acknowledgement is certainly merited. Ghiyas?
Yeah. So I think it's a great point and number of things that need to happen. First of all, we have to understand that capital will go to opportunities which give the best risk-adjusted return. If you're going to have rent-seeking opportunities in the country, and blame all the companies for it, including Angro perhaps, I'm being very open about it. Why would businesses take risks, right? And that is the responsibility of the government, which drafts policies and creates an enabling environment. So I completely agree with the notion that private sector has to lead, but the government needs to create an enabling environment by removing these inefficiencies which are there in the market, by getting out of business, and by coming up with long-term policies which will stand the test of time. When investors come and invest in with a particular government in charge, and the next government comes and questions it, that breaks confidence. So I think if you want this to prosper, remove inefficiencies, penalize undocumented sector, government should get out of business, deregulate as much as possible, and come up with long-term policies, whether it's in petrochemicals, whether it's in agriculture, overall industrial policy, what have you. And then also be mindful of the fact that when you're creating when we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about international investments, and I can tell you that if a company like Engro wishes to invest more than $10 million in a country outside Pakistan, it will go right up to the cabinet for approval. And that's okay, because the reality is that we are very cash strapped, right? We're in a massive foreign exchange crisis situation. So it's kind of understandable. But when you put regional connectivity front and center for economic growth, which is an important pillar for national security, then you have to think this through over decades, right? And I guess that's what it comes down to.
No, I think that's I think quite a brilliant point and a great segue. Amir, this issue of random new taxes on cell phones or on phone calls or on data, this is exactly what, in a sense, Ghias also acknowledges, and I know you do too, that the government has legitimate revenue needs. And so, जब ज़्यादा प्रेशर होता है FBR पे, सियासी लीडरान से, तो वो जाके जो है, उनको पता है सबसे आसान ये है कि क्योंकि मल्टीनेशनल्स हैं और इनके ऊपर ये टैक्स लागू करना आसान है, तो आके जो है वो नया टैक्स ठोक देते हैं. They're not doing it out of hatred for regional connectivity or hatred for connectivity or hatred for digital. They're doing it because of the compulsions of that moment, just like the compulsion to restrict the so-called capital flight if big firms were to start investing in USD denominated in currency in US dollars. So really we know that ये कभी-कभी legitimate होता है, ये जो हरकत होती है हुकूमत की या सरकार की. इसका longer term, do you see any kind of way out? It seems like we keep talking about many issues and regional connectivity is one of them. And then we go back to our offices, whether it's the minister or any of us, and we have to deal with the urgency of the moment, and we forget this. How do we shift the mood and the pace and the cadence of the conversation कि regional connectivity जैसी चीजें they stay on the top of the discourse mountain, and we start to frame even our urgent issues within that framework? Do you see any hope for that?
Listen, taxation, of course, we're weak in taxation. We should be taxing more as a country. Our taxes to our revenue are woefully less compared to our peers. लेकिन ये जो आप बात कर रहे हैं कि टेलीकॉम को टैक्स किया जाए, in the context of connectivity मैं बात करना चाहता हूँ. It's more about predictability and transparency of policies that we need. You go through a spectrum auction, there's a certain view that you take, and you look at a 15-year horizon. That's how you make a business case. And I'll try to put it together in the context of foreign direct investments and also local investments. What does an investor need? And then again, bring it back to the private sector. They need predictability, right? If you go on Excel, you can tweak around with cells and say, well, in this year, this thing will happen. When we take a lot of U-turns in our policy making, the investors will shy away. Whether they are foreign investors, they're big investors, small investors, and foreign investors will shy away even more because they're not familiar with the lay of the land. So Where we struggle is bringing in more investment into Pakistan, because what is a foreign investor going to do? He's going to call somebody who has already invested. A company like us, we've been here 27 years now and invested close to about $11 billion. So the biggest visiting card that Pakistan would have is a company like Jazz. Foreign investors will call us and they will ask us about our experience. And now let's go back to taxes and these things. We fully understand the government's need and right to tax. It's about making that very conscious trade-off. How much do you get today at the cost of depriving ourselves of something in future? And I think we have not made sensible trade-offs over there, especially in the context of telecommunications, in the context of internet proliferation. Even after 7 years of 4G auction in Pakistan, today we have less than 50% 4G penetration. During this time, we have invested close to about $3.2 billion on 4G. But the payback hasn't arrived. Today, 50% of the handsets still sold in Pakistan are 2G, वो जो पुराना Nokia feature phone होता है. तो हम स्मार्ट नेशन, स्मार्ट कनेक्टिविटी, डिजिटल पाकिस्तान की बातें करते हैं. जब तक हम अपनी पुरानी गलतियों से सीखेंगे नहीं, हम आगे नहीं बढ़ सकेंगे. और इसमें again, the idea is not that regulators or tax people should not regulate us or tax us. It is more about taking a holistic view about what the country needs. And that's the trade-off where I think we are really not making the right choices. And these kind of bad choices, maybe Ali was talking about, what do we leave our kids? Do we leave our kids, again in this context, with a टूटा-फूटा इंटरनेट जिसमें वो पढ़ाई नहीं कर सकते? जब कोविड हुआ सबसे ज़्यादा आ गया हमारे ऊपर प्रेशर कि भाई आपने प्रोवाइड क्यों नहीं किया इंटरनेट? वो इसलिए नहीं किया क्योंकि उसका इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर लगाने में जो राइट ऑफ वे के जो चैलेंजेस हैं वो बहुत ज़्यादा हैं पाकिस्तान में. एंड अली, जस्ट टू करेक्ट यू अ लिटिल बिट ऑन योर थिंग, even infrastructure, the fiber infrastructure, once you lay it, it still gets cut. You work through Sindh and Balochistan and you see people will consciously cut the fiber. And they will cut it multiple times and hold the telecom companies ransom. And today, our biggest worries are not to be connected with the rest of the world. Whenever there's a sea cable that goes down, we have an issue. And we have had issues in Pakistan. Right now, we have issues because parts of Pakistan are not connected because the fiber has been cut. So we just need to take a holistic view and balance our short-term needs, legitimate needs. I would not say that the government wakes up every morning to penalize Jazz or the telecom sector, but it is just an easier sector to tax. Today, a Pakistani citizen pays close to 34% tax on internet usage. And we want to educate our kids through or digital education. Now imagine कि अगर आप किसी जगह किताब ले रहे हैं और उस किताब के ऊपर 34% आपका टैक्स होए. ये क्रिमिनल चीज़ें हैं जो हमें चेंज करनी चाहिए और ये इसकी प्रेडिक्टेबिलिटी जो है वो इन्वेस्टर्स को दिखानी चाहिए.
Good. I'm glad that the diplomacy that you had in the first round of conversation has begun to give way to some candidness. By the time dessert comes around, I think we'll be flying all guns blazing with Amir Ibrahim. Minister साहब, आपकी जो presentation थी, मैं आपसे थोड़ी सी ये liberty ले रहा हूँ और audience के साथ भी, क्योंकि I had promised that we would go to the audience, and I know that we're running short on time, but I think, there's some things you might want to say in response to some of what's been said, but B, I think I'm going to ask you to maybe comment on the likelihood of us being able to step back and think more holistically. Holistic thinking की बात मेरे ख्याल है 3-4 speakers ने की. Certainly आपका जो private sector है वो आपसे ये इल्तिजा कर रहा है सरकार से और इस माशरे से कि थोड़ी holistic thinking करें ताकि हम सब big scale पे grow कर सकें. Do you anticipate a political compact in any way, shape or form given where we are today? Please be as optimistic as you possibly can be, and as soon as you're done speaking, I'll take the mic to the crowd and we'll bring some other questions in.
I think I must not have, I'm not a good communicator because clearly the message that you've received is not the message that I wanted to give. There's no pessimism here. It's very clear that if you want to solve a problem, you have to understand the nature of the problem. And shying away from the problem is never going to get you to the solution. So you have to look into the eyes of the problem and solve it. I'm reminded of this, my favorite story, where a professor was writing and the chalk fell from his hand. He said, "Damn gravity." Then he bent down and he picked the chalk up and he looked at the class and he said, "But you know what? Gravity doesn't care." So my friends, gravity doesn't care. Every time we let go of the chalk, it shall fall, because that's the nature of gravity. But once you understand gravity, like we understood propulsion, for hundreds of years, human beings tried to fly. They put wings on their hands, they put wings on their heads, they tried to jump and flutter, and they fell on their head and crashed, up until they understood the principle of propulsion. And as soon as they understood the principle of propulsion, you had 1,000-ton vessel fly more elegantly than an eagle. And I think what we're trying to do here is understand the dynamics and understand the nature of the problem, not towards any pessimism, but towards hope, towards understanding how to solve this problem and move forward. I personally think that we have not given up on any of the projects. Whether you call it TAP or you call it TAPI, I was just talking to the ambassador around the table, and we've had many rounds of conversations, and no one, neither they nor us, have given up on it. And now with the new kind of framework that they have, where there's already a pipeline coming into Herat, we are right now exploring all possibilities to take that gas from Herat and bring it into Pakistan. We are thinking about all the framework conditions, making whoever, ensuring security through making the administration partners or certain companies partners, or finding investments from Pakistani perspective, from indigenous resources, from our gas companies. We're exploring everything. So nothing has been written off. But all I'm saying is that we don't have to deal with all of these problems if we start to rethink about the region. If you're going to talk about connectivity, if you're going to talk about the region, then we have to take the regional view. And we have to understand what's gone on, what's gone wrong with the region. And we have to fix it. And the only thing that we are bringing forward, or I'm trying to bring forward from our government's perspective, is that we are creating and committed to, invested in a new framework of peace, where we would be able to work through Afghanistan, and we would be able to tap into the enormous resources in Central Asia and have the gas flow into Pakistan and have these LNG trains and have the export and have these industrial parks. I don't see any pessimism in that. I see hope. But I do believe that we'll have to rethink the region from a new lens, the lens of peace. And that's what we are doing. That's what we've been trying to do for some time, and I'm hopeful. If it's taken as long as it has taken to get where we are, it would take us a little bit time to move away and reconfigure the region. And I think we're all partners. The Central Asian states are partners in it. I think Afghanistan is partner in it. There are hopeful kind of negotiations going on between the Western powers and Iran as well, and who knows where that would end up. But all of these corridors eventually are going to open up. And once they open up, all those ideas of Gwadar being the hub, the gateway to the ocean, the exports, the infrastructure, the GDP growth, all of those things are going to come about. So please do not consider the analysis of the situation from the lens of pessimism, but from the lens of solving the problem and getting to the growth that our kids deserve. As Ali was saying, if we have disappointed our children, or our previous generations have disappointed this generation, let's not continue to do that. Let's look at the problem, solve the problem, and make sure that our future generations are proud of us. And that's basically where we are heading. In terms of the holistic thinking, I think the framework that I tried to present to you, I tried to the best of my capabilities to make that regionally holistic. Within the country, in terms of the private sector, I think it's a difficult time. I do believe we have problems. We have problems of infrastructure, of processes. We've not been able to expand our tax to GDP ratio. We're trying to do that. We're also going through a very difficult time when the responsibility that was given to me, when I walked into the office on day one, we were in commercial default. PSO is one of the largest companies that we have in Pakistan. And at that point in time, I was shying away from this because I didn't want the markets to panic. But as I walked in, my first meeting was about the PSO LC is not getting confirmed internationally. So if a company like PSO cannot get its LCs confirmed, you can imagine how far we were from default. So we're making difficult decisions. I think our partners, the large corporations and the private sector, they're taking the brunt of it with us. And we are very hopeful that as we straighten out the economy, as we move forward, and every passing month it's going to be a better situation, and every coming budget is going to be an enabling budget for growth and prosperity. We committed to it. We commit this to all the multinationals as well as to the local investors in Pakistan. I mean, we have a high tax rate right now, but that shall come down. But that would come down as we basically stabilize the country. The country first, then the companies, because of both of them put together are the recipe for the prosperity of the poor people of Pakistan, and that's what we committed to.
Thank you, Minister Saab, for, I think, articulating things in the way that you did. I'm particularly taken and admire the calm and the reassuring tone that you have. I do think that it is a troubling time, especially given the natural calamity that has befallen millions of Pakistanis over the last couple of weeks and that we're seeing play out through the floods. So it's good to have a steady and calm and reassuring set of hands at the wheel. I think before we break for dinner, I think it's important to engage what is an audience that could easily replace, the stage probably 3 or 4 times in terms of how senior and influential people here are. There might be specific questions that you have, and there might be generic questions. If there are, please raise your hand, and somebody will bring you a mic, and we'll ask you a question. I'm also conscious of the gender imbalance on the stage and in general in our country. So I'm particularly keen on beginning the question session by addressing that imbalance, but we also don't want to inorganically force the issue. Start with the gentleman in the fetching tie.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। अब पूरी जो डिस्कशंस हो रही हैं उसमें हम 3 बातों को बड़ी बार बार कह रहे हैं, हॉलिस्टिक, ऑप्टिमिज्म, पैसिमिज्म, लेकिन और फिर हम फ्रेमवर्क की भी बात करेंगे जी, हमें इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का फ्रेमवर्क और करना है। लेकिन मेरे ख्याल से इसमें जब हम पूरा एनवायरनमेंट देखते हैं और जो अर्ली का आर्टिकल है उसको भी हम रिव्यू करते हैं, तो उसमें नज़र आता है कि हमारे पास मल्टीपल मेगा बिलियन डॉलर प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, और वो प्रोजेक्ट्स ओवर द ईयर्स हो रहे होते हैं, लेकिन हमारे पास पॉलिटिकल अनस्टेबिलिटी या डिसकंटिन्यूटी ऑफ पॉलिटिकल एनवायरनमेंट की वजह से हम बहुत सारे इनिशिएटिव्स को कंप्लीट नहीं कर पाते। तो इस सिचुएशन में हमारे पास जो लीडरशिप है उनके पास क्या सॉल्यूशन है कि अगर हमारे पास पॉलिटिकल एनवायरनमेंट चेंज होता है या गवर्नमेंट चेंज होती है, तो ये जो हमारे मल्टी बिलियन डॉलर इनिशिएटिव्स हैं ये कंटिन्यू रहें और उनका जो रिजल्ट है, जो फ्रूट है, वो हम ले सकें। आपके इसके बारे में क्या राय है?
आपका किसी मखसूस शख्सियत से ये सवाल है या you for every, so for whoever wants to answer that question, maybe डॉक्टर साहब अगर आप इस पे बिस्मिल्लाह करें।
देखिए, मैं आपको 3 पर्सपेक्टिव्स आपके सामने रखूंगा जो इस वक्त हुकूमत का फोकस है। पहली चीज़ तो ये कि हर चीज़ जो अब हम करना चाह रहे हैं और जो करने जा रहे हैं, दैट वुड बी प्रोडक्टिविटी फोकस्ड। सो हम ये बिलीव करते हैं कि अगर पाकिस्तान को आगे बढ़ना है तो पाकिस्तान की प्रोडक्टिविटी जो है हमें बढ़ाना होगी, और एक वक्त की प्रोडक्टिविटी तो टेक्नोलॉजी या किसी मल्टीनेशनल कॉरपोरेशन के ज़रिए टेक्नोलॉजी ला के इम्प्रूव की जा सकती है, बट लॉन्ग रन में प्रोडक्टिविटी सिर्फ इनोवेशन इंजन से बढ़ती है। सो पाकिस्तान की इनोवेशन कैपेसिटी जो है, दोनों एब्जॉर्प्टिव कैपेसिटी ऑफ इनोवेशन एज वेल एज इंडिजिनस इनोवेशन की जो कैपेबिलिटी है, उसको बढ़ाने के लिए काम किया जाएगा। और इस सिलसिले में बहुत सी पॉलिसीज़ सामने आ रही हैं, जिनमें से कई चीज़ें ऐसी हैं जहाँ पे एक तरह से विंडफॉल पॉलिसीज़ बनी हुई थी, तो एक लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड क्रिएट करने की कोशिश की जा रही है एलोकेशन ऑफ फैक्टर इनपुट के ज़रिए। और जब लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड हो जाएगा तो सिर्फ वो जीतेगा जो प्रोडक्टिव ज़्यादा है, वो नहीं जिसको फैक्टर इनपुट सस्ता मिल रहा है। तो एक तो ये आई थिंक एक एक चेंज है जो हम सामने लाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। दूसरी जो चीज़ अहम है हमारे लिए वो है कि पाकिस्तान को थोड़ा सा एक्सपोर्ट फोकस्ड होना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि हमारा एक्सटर्नल सेक्टर जो है उसकी वजह से ये प्रॉब्लम्स जिनका आप जिक्र कर रहे हैं बार बार हमारे सामने आते हैं। हमारा एक्सटर्नल सेक्टर जो जब आउट ऑफ लाइन हो जाता है तो हमें अपनी ग्रोथ को थोड़ा सा कंटेन करना पड़ता है, ग्रोथ को स्लो डाउन करना पड़ता है, और फिर थोड़ी देर के बाद जब सेक्टर थोड़ा सा हमारी इंपोर्ट एक्सपोर्ट का बैलेंस जब बराबर होता है फिर दोबारा से हम ग्रोथ शुरू करते हैं, फिर 4-5-6% पे आते हैं तो फिर दोबारा से पता चलता है कि इंपोर्ट्स बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गई हैं क्योंकि हमारी तमाम रिसोर्सेज बाहर से आ रहे होते हैं। तो दूसरी जो अहम फोकस आपके सामने आएगा अदर दैन प्रोडक्टिविटी एंड लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड, वो आएगा एक्सपोर्ट्स के हवाले से कि एक्सपोर्ट्स जो हैं वो फोकस में आएंगी। तीसरी जो अहम चीज़ आपके सामने आने वाले वक्त में आएगी वो ये है कि हमारा इन्हसार जो है वो इंडिजिनस रिसोर्सेज पर बढ़ता चला जाएगा। मसलन अभी भी जब हम कतर भी गए हुए थे तो जो चीज़ें हम प्रमोट करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे वो इंडिजिनस रिसोर्सेज थी, मसलन सोलर एनर्जी या हमारी विंड एनर्जी के हवाले से। वैसे तो बहुत सी और भी चीज़ें थी जिनको हमने प्रमोट किया है, लेकिन हमारा अब इन्हसार जो है हम कोशिश ये कर रहे हैं कि हमारे अपने जो रिसोर्सेज हैं उन पे हमारा इन्हसार बढ़ता चला जाए। ये 3 चीज़ें हैं, मगर इन तीनों चीज़ों का महवर जो है वो गुर्बत है, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान एक गरीब मुल्क है। तो पाकिस्तान के अंदर हमें ये दोनों चीज़ें साथ के साथ लेकर चलना होंगी। जिस तरह अमेरिका में या वेस्टर्न सोसाइटीज़ में हम कहते हैं कि इवेंचुअली द इकॉनमी शैल ट्रिकल डाउन टू द पुअर पीपल, वो बात ठीक है, उनको सूट करती है, उनके पास इतनी स्ट्रेंथ है इकोनॉमिक कि इवेंचुअली जब वो गरीब आदमी तक पहुंचेगी तब तक के लिए गरीब आदमी को वो बचाने का सामान कर पाएंगे। हमारे लिए ये अहम है कि हम जैसा जैसा आगे बढ़ें अपने गरीब लोगों को साथ लेकर चलें, जिनको अल्लाह ने साहिब हैसियत नहीं बनाया उनको भी साथ लेकर चलें, और सिर्फ ये जो ट्रिकल डाउन एक फ्रेमवर्क है सिर्फ उस पर फोकस नहीं करें। तो ये मैंने आपको बता दिया, महवर बता दिया। महवर है गुर्बत और गरीब आदमी, और उसको ऊंचा उठाना, ऊपर लाना, उसकी कैपेसिटीज़ बिल्ड करनी जिसमें कॉम्पिटेंस है, जिसमें एजुकेशन है, क्योंकि उसी से प्रोडक्टिविटी बढ़ेगी। और ये सब करने के बाद प्रोडक्टिविटी, एक्सपोर्ट्स एंड इंडिजिनस रिसोर्सेज, ये एक फ्रेमवर्क है जो इस वक्त की हुकूमत के सामने है।
Thank you, Minister Saab. I think, Ali, maybe you want to comment on this as well?
जी, एक छोटा सा कमेंट है मेरा, वो ये है कि कुछ हद तक जो आपका सवाल है वो एड्रेस हो जाएगा अगर ये चार्टर ऑफ इकोनॉमी सियासी पार्टियां आपस में साइन कर दें। तो वो प्रपोजल है, हम सब जानते हैं उसमें हर्डल्स हैं कुछ, लेकिन आई थिंक आज के लिए नहीं, हमेशा के लिए ज़रूरी है कि तमाम पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज़ एग्री करें कि जो भी आपस में उनके इख्तलाफात हों या इलेक्शनियरिंग हो, कुछ बुनियादी चीज़ों पे वो रुकेंगे नहीं और लड़ेंगे नहीं।
Thanks, Ali. Dr. Moeed Yusuf.
I think just want to amplify जो अली ने बात किया है, I was going to come at it a different way. देखें बात ये है, sorry, I've never been known to be diplomatic. कोई भी पाकिस्तान का प्रॉब्लम, कनेक्टिविटी की आप बात करें, but any problem is not resolvable in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. So if you ask me, we have gotten into this habit as a country, as a nation, as a society. Government. It's irrelevant. कुछ ऐसी चीजें हैं on which we have to agree, ये डायरेक्शन है, ये काम करना है, अजाब भी आ जाए तो ये काम होता रहेगा. But I have to tell you, again with all due respect, I think we're simply not mature enough to be there. मैं politics की कोई बात नहीं कर रहा. By the way, I'm not talking about today or anything. I'm talking about basic structural policies. मैं आपको इस तरह प्रेजेंट करता हूं, जब कम से कम मेरा पहला एक्सपीरियंस था गवर्नमेंट में. The first inclination I had was to come and say कि मेरे से पहले वालों ने क्या काम किया है वो मुझे दें. I want to see what of that can continue and we can build on. And the response was, why? You have to make your mark. So you have to first nullify what the other has done and then move on. This is immaturity. This has nothing to do with policy. So we have to find a way, sorry, but to, as a system, to grow up and know कि कुछ चीजें 3-4 साल में सॉल्व नहीं हो सकती. No matter what we do, वो 10 साल 15 साल प्रोसेस चलेगा तो फिर होगा. Let me also just make one more very provocative point. पाकिस्तान की financial management or economic management. 90% is preordained. वो हमारे कंट्रोल में नहीं है. डेट वापस करना है, कुछ कर, टूल सिर्फ 5 से 10% के लिए. सो जो भी आ जाए, अरस्तु भी आ जाए, वो वही काम करता है. लेकिन पहले दूसरे का नलिफाई करना है, फिर खुद करना है. वी हैव टू कम आउट ऑफ दिस माइंडसेट. ओनली देन वी कैन डू व्हाट अली इज सेइंग.
मैं मजीद कोई तबसरा नहीं करूंगा डॉक्टर साहब. जी नहीं, बिल्कुल मैं ऑनेस्ट नहीं होना चाहता इस वक्त. आई वांट टू गो बैक टू द, देयर इज अ फ्रेंड राइट देयर, आई कैन सी यू थ्रू द कैमरा. तो वहां तक अगर हम माइक ले जाएं. एंड आर देयर एनी अदर? ओह, वी हैव, okay, so we have two, sir, we have two here. We're going to go there. We're going to collect 3 questions, the brother, and then madam, aap, aur phir aap dono. Ji, bismillah. Keep going. Aur aage. Aur aage. Okay, if we don't have a mic, आप खड़े होके सवाल पूछ लें, मुझे आवाज आ जाएगी.
थैंक यू वेरी मच. एक तो ये कि जो जिस तरह से इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स और हाइब्रिड व्हीकल्स हैं, आई थिंक उस पर हमें ड्यूटी को देखना चाहिए गवर्नमेंट को. और जिस तरह से सोलर एनर्जी है विच इज़ मोर इंडिजिनस एंड लोकल, और माशाल्लाह मिनिस्टर साहब ने उसका जिक्र भी किया. हम अगर उसको देखें और हम उसे फॉसल फ्यूल्स के साथ सब्सिट्यूट करें या लोकलाइज करें और यहाँ पे इंडस्ट्री को प्रमोट करें, एक तो मेरा ये पॉइंट है. दूसरा जो मेरा पॉइंट है वो ये कि इंटेलेक्चुअल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में हमने कोई बात नहीं की आज. प्रॉब्ली दिस इज नॉट द टॉपिक प्रॉब्ली हमारा. आई थिंक विद सो मच ऑफ यूथ एंड अभी जो इमर्जिंग कैपिटल है, इसमें अगर हम डिजिटल वर्ल्ड को देखें और आने वाले टाइम को देखें, तो दिस इज द एरिया, रिसर्च, ह्यूमन कैपिटल, हेल्थ केयर, जिसमें एक्चुअली वी कैन एक्सेल वेरी क्विकली इवन अमंग्स डिफरेंट नेशंस. आई वाज जस्ट रीडिंग अ कमेंट अबाउट इजराइल कि वो विद अ पॉपुलेशन ऑफ जस्ट 9 million, and what is the level of their research output and the innovation they're producing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. If the questions and comments can focus on the connectivity, regional connectivity aspect of the evening, that would be great. Madam, आपने पहले हाथ खड़ा किया था.
Gender imbalance that exists is on the stage right now, which is part of the inherent problem in the country. There is a certain amount of privilege at play here, so forgive me if I must point that out. I have to. I can't do justice to my female, Pakistanis without saying that. So let me just begin there. My question is around foreign policy, so I'll direct it at the ambassador and perhaps you, sir, the former NSA, and then perhaps the government minister. I work for the UK government. It is a part of my job day in and day out to present Pakistan as a business case, the very business cases that we're speaking about here. What I have understood is 2 things. There's the geostrategic significance hand has been overplayed. We need to be attractive, lucrative for people to come to us. People are not coming to us because we are situated. We happen to be geographically situated in a certain place. Now, that may take away a bit from the premise of this conversation here today, but I think it needs to be said. Desires, and our desires particularly, don't pay dividends. Markets reward businesses that are profitable. Regions reward economies that are fast growing and are contributing to the growth of the region, and that is just something that we have to say and set out here. My question is, what are we doing? And I know Ambassador Siddiqui has been doing this in the past. What are we doing so that conversations that feature thought leaders as yourselves in other countries are featuring Pakistan in the conversation, are talking about Pakistan, and this desire for connectivity cannot just be organic to us. It can't be endemic to us. It has to be featured on stages and conversations that are happening around the world, which I can attest to, at least where I see myself, where I see us as a key sort of stakeholder in the IMF program, in the FATF discussions. We see this every day. The mistrust is too large. The murkiness around the country is too large for us to progress beyond, beyond the reputation, and there's a reputational risk. So what are we doing to go beyond that? And if you help me answer that, that will help me build the business case that I build anyway, every day for the country. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the work that you do. There's a question behind you. The light is in my eyes. It's literally right directly behind you. Yeah, there it is. That'll be the last question in this round, and possibly, with due apologies to everyone, maybe the last question overall, because I'm under extreme duress as far as time is concerned. Madam, aap apna sawal please पूछिए.
Thank you, Musharraf, and good evening, everyone. मेरा सवाल बुनियादी तौर पे उस निज़ाम के हवाले से था जिसके हवाले से मोहित यूसुफ साहब ने भी जिक्र किया कि हमारा जो निज़ाम हुकूमत है, जो वजारतें हैं और जिन्होंने ये इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और ये कनेक्शन बिल्ड करने हैं, जिन्होंने हमारे फ्यूचर की पॉलिसी बनानी है, उनकी आपस में कोऑर्डिनेशन ना होने के बराबर है. हम बड़े प्राउडली आके कह देते हैं ये विजन 2025 है, ये विजन 2030 है. उसमें माइलस्टोन्स क्या होते हैं, 2 साल, 3 साल, 5 साल, 6 साल, वो कभी भी नहीं बताया जाता, एवेल्युएट नहीं किया जाता. कैसे कहीं अगर गलती हो गई है तो उसको कैसे दुरुस्त करना ये भी नहीं होता. सिर्फ ये होता है कि एक नई गवर्नमेंट आई है, वो नए स्लोगन्स लेके आ जाती है, तो जो वो जाने वाले होते हैं तो वो सारा का सारा उनका जो भी उन्होंने बुनियाद रखी होती है वो टूट जाती है. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि कनेक्टिविटी के हवाले से भी यही हमारा मसला है. एंड देन दिस डिस्कशन सीम्स टू बी इनकम्प्लीट. हमने मतलब हमारे यहाँ क्लाइमेट चेंज के बहुत सारे मसाइल हैं, पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी के बहुत सारे मसाइल हैं. अगर आप उनको विदाउट टेकिंग दैट इन अकाउंट, आई थिंक हम कोई फ्यूचर की कनेक्टिविटी चाहे रीजन में आपने करनी हो, साउथ एशिया में करनी हो, अपने नेबर्स में करनी हो, यू वोंट बी एबल टू डू दैट विदाउट टेकिंग दैट इनटू अकाउंट. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Great points. Thank you, Tanzila. Who wants to take, especially the second question, but there was a mention of EVs and intellectual, I guess, capital or resources. Mohit, one of the questions was directed to you. We can go to Dr. Musaddiq Malik to close, but maybe we start with you, Mohit. Yeah.
So let me sort of sum up what I've heard. Again, coming from my experience, again, I'd never done this before. I think we have to give a public sector, private sector की conversation. I have a lot of sort of concerns about how we approach the private sector as public sector. But at the same time, we have to understand that the public sector works day and night for the same cause and does the best that it can. So ये conversation has to be constructive. आपका ये point geostrategy वाला भी बिल्कुल ठीक है, and we understand that. But think of it another way. There is a codified, in a policy that was approved by the cabinet, issued by the state of Pakistan, there's a codified consensus that national security is now economic security with everything else built around it. There is a codified consensus that geoeconomics पे और focus होगा. So, yes, maybe there are reasons why geostrategy was so important. It was a rational decision at some point. As somebody who sort of worked on security, I think it's unfair to say that people weren't thinking at that time and just went in this direction. There were reasons. Now there is a reason to move in a particular direction, and we are going there. It's not going to be overnight, but I keep repeating that the business case has to be clear. उसके बाद institutional change जो है, it becomes somewhat easier. But for instance, let me just say this. I've made a lot of not friends, let's put it that way, raising this again and again. Moving forward, economic diplomacy has to be the crux of foreign policy and diplomacy, right? But I think if the Foreign Office, the colleagues from the Foreign Office, Commerce Ministry, BOI, others are here, we used to have this debate all the time. and we couldn't figure out whose job is it to run this, right? Because we haven't actually done that in the past. It may have been an afterthought in some ways, but now we have to create structures where this becomes the primary focus. So I think over time this will happen. People realize it. मैं बहुत सुनता था कि जी नहीं ये कभी नहीं हो सकता, कोई कहता था फौज नहीं करने देगी, कोई कहता था नहीं गवर्नमेंट नहीं करने देगी. We have it codified. That means everybody is on board. The point goes back to the original one. Are we ready to take up good ideas and take them forward no matter where they came from? Because economic diplomacy भी एक साल में नहीं होगी, economic security भी एक साल में नहीं होगी, and we've just got to keep moving in that direction seamlessly. वरना ये चीजें I think break होती रहेंगी. And just to tie it to the one other thing I heard, I think the biggest problem, and I may be biased in this, is that we don't have any space in the public sector to think intellectually, to challenge with new ideas, and think beyond tomorrow. You know, we're a country that is caught up in firefighting for obvious rational reasons. We have to create hubs of excellence where intellectual thought challenges what we believe to be the cardinal truth. वो नहीं होता, unfortunately. जितना ज़्यादा होगा, उतनी जल्दी आप ये जो economics और economic diplomacy और उधर जाएंगे.
Yeah, I mean, with the way government works right now, I think that's not going to happen. So there has to be a political commitment to make that happen. We can have this argument, afterwards as well. Ambassador Siddiqui, I wanted to give you the last word after the Honorable Minister, given that you wrote the paper and set the table for us, so I'll let you wrap up. Honorable Minister Saab, आपका जो है वो तीनों सवालों पे आपकी कुछ thoughts जो हैं आप अगर आप share करना चाहें.
मैं तो सवाल ही भूल गया हूँ, लेकिन जो याद पड़ता है बता देता हूँ. देखें, पहली बात तो ये है, आई थिंक कुछ थोड़ा सा हम ये नेशनल सिक्योरिटी का ईडीएम जो है ना इसको ओवर प्ले करते हैं. आई मीन योर इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ पूरी दुनिया ये करती है. वाई वी ऑलवेज एंड अप विद एवरी एनर्जी बिकम्स अ नेशनल सिक्योरिटी इशू, फूड बिकम्स अ नेशनल सिक्योरिटी इशू, फ्लड्स बिकम अ नेशनल सिक्योरिटी इशू. तो लगता है कि हर चीज़ जो है वो नेशनल सिक्योरिटी इशू है. तो मुझे कभी कभी ऐसे लगता है कि अजीब किस्म का कोई पैथोस है जिसके अंदर हम रह रहे हैं, जिसके अंदर हर चीज़ हमारी नेशनल सिक्योरिटी को टेम्पर कर देती है और हिला देती है, और हमें लगता है कि नहीं, कोई इतनी ऐसी ख़ास बात नहीं. दुनिया के ममालिक हैं, हम भी एक ट्रेजेक्ट्री पे हैं, हमें उसमें हर्डल्स आ रही हैं, इकनॉमिक ग्रोथ की हर्डल्स भी आ रही हैं, हम उनको सॉल्व करेंगे. वी ऑल स्टैंड कमिटेड. ये सब लोग जो यहाँ बैठे हैं मुख्तलिफ रोल्स प्ले करते हैं. आई डोंट लुक एट दैम एज इतनी डायर स्लैंट से मैं उनको नहीं देखता कि ये भी नेशनल सिक्योरिटी. तो मैं पूछता हूँ कि वो क्या है जो नामुराद नहीं है नेशनल सिक्योरिटी का इशू. मुझे तो एक नहीं नज़र आता. तो मुझे तो नज़र आते हैं बड़ी सीधी सी चीज़ें. आपने बड़ी अहम बात की ब्रांड के हवाले से. आवर ब्रांड इज़ गोइंग टू बी द कंपनीज एंड द पीपल दैट वी हैव एंड द पॉलिसी दैट वी मेंटेन. इट्स एज सिंपल एज दैट. अगर हमारी पॉलिसी के अंदर सिर्फ वो जियो political angle nahi hoga, which has kind of historically come from not necessarily the economic angle, but from certain other perspectives, I think we'd fare out okay. We have these corporations which are growing. I think we have these people who leave Pakistan, they go all over the world and they become world class as they go all over the world. So I think if we create that environment for the people in Pakistan where they can become world class in Pakistan, then Pakistani people would be deemed world class. I think if we focus on the productivity of our corporations and we encourage our corporations and we don't criminalize making money, and we encourage from rags to riches becomes a story that we also celebrate, then many boys, young men and women, they would rise and move from rags to riches, and we'd celebrate their stories, and that story from rags to riches would be our story, our national story, and that would be our brand. What's wrong with that? Why is it that our situation or our brand has to be far more complicated than the Finland's brand or the Singapore's brand and so on and so forth? There was no geopolitical kind of imperative in Singapore. It was a straightforward country which imported in 2004 or 5, if I remember, $60 billion worth of factor inputs. and exported about $170 billion worth of stuff. So the value addition was $110, $120 billion. What is so complicated about that, for Christ's sake? Where does this kind of thing kicks in? Look at Finland, where it was. Finland was a forest just about 30 years ago. And their biggest export was paper and rubber. Look at them now. They're the hub of technology. Where was the geopolitics in that? It was straightforward innovation and competitiveness and productivity, and the world, going to the world with a straight face and trying to sell what you can sell with a competitive advantage, and that became your brand. Look at the innovation ecology of the United States. Look at that. Just in the Midwest, there are 10 universities that spend over $2 to $2.5 billion every year in their research infrastructure. In the Midwest, which is neither East Coast, no Harvards, Yales, Princetons, nor West Coast, not Berkeley, UCLA, Stanford, right in the middle of the country, middle of nowhere. They invest $2.5 billion in their innovation ecology. So their innovation strength is what drives that country. I mean, they continuously get beaten up by the by the cheaper economies of or less expensive, or what may I say, where the labor force is cheaper. They get beaten up by the traditional sectors, whether it be steel or textile, and they continuously innovate to biotech and nanotech and this tech and that tech. Where's that coming from? It's straightforward. So keep it straightforward. And if you keep it straightforward, you would have a straightforward brand. They take that straightforward brand with a straight face to the rest of the world, and don't tell them you need us. Tell us we are competitive. Tell them you're differentiated. Tell them you're competitive. Tell them with a straight face that you can do it better, and you will have that brand. Like your physicians have that brand in the US. Are Pakistani physicians looked upon as second-tier physicians or second-tier investment bankers or second-tier anything? Not at all. So get inspired and just keep a straight face and go with a straight face to the world and sell the straight product competitively. As far as the last comment, the last, and let me also tell you that there are very few countries in the world which have developed competitive edge because of factor input. Very few countries. You'd be hard-pressed to find a country which became world-class because they were growing something or they were mining something. There are very few examples. I mean, there are examples of one country after another where they had nothing and they built up stuff because they imported, they added value, and they sold it. So therefore, don't just think about we're here and the gas is going to come. I mean, yes, we need these things and we'll get these things. But what is going to matter eventually is what we do with those things, and that should be our focus. I personally think that in our politics, I think one of the comments was about that. I think our politics is a little bit morbid, I would admit. But I would say that democracy is a competitive marketplace for policy. Just the way competition works in the private sector, in the private sector growth, similarly democracy works in the marketplace of policies. I mean, who says there's no accountability? There's no government has been elected twice in Pakistan. That's accountability. You get thrown out because you do not meet the expectations of the people of Pakistan. That's the competitive marketplace. You go present yourself, you present your slate for the past 5 years, and people reject you and throw you out. That's the marketplace. And I do agree to a certain extent that we need to have some kind of reasonable consensus on reasonability, but not necessarily a consensus on policies. I would bring policies in public interest, and my competitors, the opposition, would rip it apart in public interest and show me the ways which create better public policy. It is ironic and unfortunate that that discussion doesn't take place, and the discussion is about tum ye ho or main wo hu or tum ye ho. But as we evolve and we get into this marketplace called democracy, hopefully those discussions would give way to discussions on policy, and they have to be as competitive as we expect the competition to be in the marketplace.
Thank you, Minister Saab, especially for that final note of optimism about the maturity of our democracy. Imminently, inshallah, aapke muh mein ki shakar. Ambassador Siddiqui, you get the last word, but remember, you are now standing between a very sort of august crowd and their dinner. So over to you.
Thank you. I'll just address the second question. I think one part of it may not have been addressed. I think if that part was, how do we sell Pakistan to overseas investors? The answer is that in the domestic economy, there is plenty of opportunity, in the rupee economy. And that explains why these automakers from Korea have entered the market. That explains why Hutchison Ports decided to build yet another container terminal in the city of Karachi. So there is foreign investment. It's not as much as it should be, of course, but there is foreign investment in that area. The problem is that, the government has equal sets of incentives regardless of what you invest into. So the incentive for boosting exports should be much more than cheap gas for exporters. There should be many more incentives to attract them, because that's really the area where we have to sell. So I would just make that small point. I think to some, I would only say that nothing worth doing comes without problems. And of course, holding the realism up high and questioning everything we do and why things have not happened in the past and what the hurdles are is incredibly important. But once we have done that, I think if the goal is something that we all agree on, i.e. there is no option but to integrate regionally, then the only thing I would leave you with is to have a great sense of urgency. Because the world is passing us by, and the opportunity we have, both for integration at this moment, may not be present 5 years down the road. So that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you, not just for those comments, but for writing this important piece. Thanks to the entire panel, Amir Ibrahim, Riaz Khan, Honorable Minister Dr. Musaddiq Malik, Asfar Ehsan for bringing us all together as you always do, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, our former National Security Advisor, Ambassador Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, and of course I will let Rabia, or I will request Rabia to take over. Thank you again. A round of applause for the panel. Thank you.
So we have the Honorable Ambassador of Turkmenistan here, and he would like to say something. So I'm giving the mic to him before I take over. Sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I want to thank you for organizing this evening, this meeting, and inviting us, Central Asian ambassadors. I want to thank you on behalf of my colleagues from Central Asia and Azerbaijan also here with us. Thank you so much for interesting conversation. Yes, of course, Pakistan future is great, and the topic of today's meeting is the next great infrastructure connector. We fully support that, and we understand that Pakistan is a great partner, and our countries are considering Pakistan as a very important partner in the region. We share our history, traditions, culture, and of course, our future is together. So our countries, Central Asian, very much interested in developing relations with Pakistan, bilateral and multilateral. And of course, we are interested in rising trade turnover between our countries. And also, of course, what Pakistan is interested in, energy cooperation. Our countries are rich in energy, so we are ready, and we wish our leadership very much interested to develop relations and bring energy to Pakistan. One of them is the Tapi gas pipeline, which comes from my country, Turkmenistan. Of course, it is easy to say that just put pipeline, open tap in Turkmenistan, and gas will come to your home. Easy to say, but to implement this project, there is a lot of things which must be discussed and solved. What is important that we must, as Senator Malik mentioned, important to understand the reality on the ground. understand the interest of every participating in project country. It needs time, but for these purposes, need more meetings. We have intergovernmental commission meetings. We have ministerial meetings. So it is important to have more frequent meetings to solve these issues and go ahead with these joint projects. And also, I want to say that Central Asia also interested in Pakistan as a transit country. As you know, we are landlocked countries. We need access to open sea. We need more access. We have two directions to the open sea, but we need more. And one of important routes access, and one of the shortest routes access to open sea is route via Afghanistan and Pakistan. So please do not forget our interest also. Keep in mind we are interested also in developing relations with Pakistan. Thank you very much. All the best to you. Thank you.
So this was an absolutely splendid discussion from a panel of the most worthy speakers from different sectors. But I would also like to acknowledge and compliment our most worthy audience. I think this was select gathering, a very exclusive gathering, and look at everybody still on their seats, still interested. I'm sure it's not just the food, but the discussion that's happened. So before we move in, all right, let's give a round of applause to all of you, the audience. So at this point, I'd like to request Air Chief Marshal Sohail Aman, Chief Executive, Strategic Engagements for the Nutshell Group, and Pakistan's Chief of Air Staff for the period 2015 to 2018. Sir, would you please come here and give your closing address?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good evening. What a thrilling session, what a brainstorming session. Possibly none of us could even blink an eye were to talk of moving away from our chairs. Special thanks to our worthy speakers who brought everything threadbare. And I'm not going to capitulate on everything which was said, but a few key points. Thanks to you for being here and such a select gathering which came up with absolutely to the point questions and a lot of people watching online, so thanks everybody. But my special thanks to Ambassador Ali Siddiqui. We have a relation which is very long, and it so happened that at Nutshell we were debating the subject when this paper came on our table, and we said, wow. I'm sure you have read the paper, and few of you will read the paper. And why I want to pay special thanks to him, that for everything, there is a start point. And what today we feel is that these are time-consuming things. They do not happen in the wink of an eye. So there has to be a start point, and the start point was just about the right. And I say it for a reason. We're a nation, which nation doesn't have issues and problems? Everyone has. But then look at the kind of resilience that this nation has put up. And I'll come to the not that positive part again, but let's look at the complete positivity. What were we at independence and what we are right today? Wasn't our elders thought of becoming a nuclear state, and we became, and I think that's the kind of the best thing I say, what happened to South Asia was that we became nuclear, and that's it. Nobody coming, knocking up at our doors and giving threats. So that part brought stability, in my point of view, into South Asia. CPEC is something which is already there. And when Ali makes a point that this connectivity to the road, railways, and digital, this all is there. Few of the projects are done, few need to be articulated, and they need to go on. The point here is that you need continuity of policies. Because when you go into the regions, and what the investors and your friendly countries look, they look at a stable government, they look at the continuity of policies. I think those are the areas, and those are definitely touched upon. That's nothing new that I'm talking about. But then there is a debate on the National Charter of Economy, and there are policies which can continue to go. And I think there is a consensus on larger part of, even in the political domain, that we should get this straight. And what regional connectivity that we're talking about through the cars here is a part of the jigsaw puzzle of the complete economic landscape. So that be it, and that's what we face. But ladies and gentlemen, the challenges that we talked about are perfectly right and true. But the challenges provide you the best opportunities to thrive on. If ASEAN could do it, if EU could go ahead and establish it, Turks could go ahead and do it. I'm not giving an example, but OAU, Organization of African Union, they still did a bit of effort to get there. Why can't we? And we will, and we shall, inshallah. That's not something that we should absolutely think negatively about. These are the processes. These are intricate. These are complex. But these have to be battled with. So what happens is that it brings you around one factor, and that's the commitment of the leadership to understand. We, as political leaders of the country, because they are the people who drive the train and they are the engine, have to have firm belief that this is workable, this is doable, and this fits right into the jigsaw puzzle of the economic metrics. It will be so unfortunate if we don't ride this train. The electricity, the road network, everything is fine, but the digital connectivity that we talked about is absolutely the key. You can't do all this efficiently if you have that going fine. And again, on the digital connectivity, you need to make sure that it goes down to all the tiers to have people-to-people contact. And that brings the point when you really need to develop. You have cultural similarities. We've been to Central Asian republics. Despite all that time, they were never Russianized. Russia still believes that they're part of them, but they were not. But look at the vacuum which came up. Immediately the Americans went in, and Americans have put in something like $90 billion in different parts to make sure that law and order, the political system, all that copes up well. The Chinese went in, something like $40 billion, look at the energy thing. And the best part is that, like the worthy ambassador said, in 2018, the Central Asian republics went out to the United Nations General Assembly and got their regional charter approved from there. So the source is there. You're right in between to make sure it happens, and then the dividends are brought up to the people. And I would conclude by saying that there are three internationally known steps to progress and giving prosperity to a people: security, stability, and then prosperity. How fortunate are we, and what kind of sacrifices did we go through? We talked of the 2 decades, and look at this country. Has there been a country who has been put into this kind of security dilemma when everybody around us wanted us to be into that battle of the terrorism? 80,000 people, $120 billion. These are the kind of figures that this poor nation had to go through for no fault of ours. But then the resilient nation did go through. We are fortunate that we are over that arena. We are fortunate that we have political system and the democracies struggling. And the democracies are by definition turbulent. So that be it. And we need to understand that this process of evolution will come in. But the political leadership must all understand, and these leaders have to make sure that the economic roadmap is absolutely followed in the right manner. And that brings to the stability part of it. And then it is the economic stability. The challenges that were pointed out, especially by the National Security Advisor, those are the real world challenges. But then it is the leadership who should drive the path, make sure that the deliverables are done. And that's the art of the leadership. Basically, it's the public sector which needs to open arms and embrace the private sector to make sure the deliverables and the intellectual capacity is absolutely utilized. Because at the end of the day, we're all Pakistanis. We all want to bring prosperity to our people. And we all want to live as a responsible nation. Opportunity is there. Thank you, Ali, for putting us all together here through such a brainstorming session. And we promise that your paper will see into a much more elaborate white paper, go out to all the public in the private sector, and we'll inshallah pray, and this shall happen, inshallah. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Sir Sohail. So in the interest of time, I will not say the things that I wanted to say. I think all has been said and said very well and very comprehensively. So now we'll move on to our souvenir presentation, which is just to present a token of our appreciation to all our speakers. For this, I'd request founder and CEO, Nutshell Group, and founder, CPG, Asfar Ehsan, to please, if you could take your position on the stage, and all our speakers to please stay seated, while I invite a very special guest, a very special person who's sitting in the audience. I will request him to please present souvenirs amongst the speakers, and that is Air Chief Marshal Abbas Khattak, Nishan-e-Imtiaz, Sitara Basalat. He was Pakistan's Chief of Air Staff from 1994 to 1997. Sir Abbas Khattak, will you please join us on the stage? Sir, I would request you to present the first souvenir to Ambassador Ali J. Siddiqui. Thank you. Next, if please Mr. Riaz Khan could receive his souvenir. I'd request Amir Ibrahim to please come to receive his souvenir. Thank you, Sir Abbas. Very kind of you. Thank you, sir. To present the next few souvenirs, I'd like to request Federal Secretary Commerce, Mr. Saleh Faruqi, to please join us on the stage. I think we can be a little more generous with our claps. So I would request Dr. Moeed Yusuf to please receive his souvenir. Senator Dr. Musaddiq Malik, sir, please. And last but definitely not the least, our brilliant moderator, Musharraf Zaidi. So this last thing that we're going to do will go down in history and it become part of our archives, which is a group photograph. Sir Abbas Khattak, I'm sorry to be bothering you, but could you please join us again for the group photo? I don't think I even need to tell you what's next. It's dinner. It's on both sides of the hall, so you can continue to network. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.